Unmuted.
We're good? Okay, I'm gonna call the meeting to order. Before I go any further, our clerk has a resolution or bylaw or something.
Thank you, Councilor Aitchison. So with the warden and deputy warden not here today, the resolution that I've to put forward is that Council-elect Jim Aitchison chair for the May 17th, 2023 regular council meeting. Can I get moved for that? You and Councilor Orr. All in favor? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I was chatting with Ron. I was pretty sure she wasn't coming today and her ward negates, and she asked if I would do this. And I said, yeah, that's not a problem. But we had to do the formalities to do it. Anyway, we'll start with a moment of reflection. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Perth County is situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, who have long-standing relationship with the land and water throughout the region. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit people who call this territory home. As a county, we have a responsibility for the reconciliation and continued stewardship of the land which we live and work. You can make a disclosure of pecuniary interest now or at any point in time through the meeting, should one arise. And next will be confirmation of the agenda. We have no additions or deletions.
Yeah, this time.
Okay, motion to approve the agenda. Councilor McDermott. Councilor Smith. Those in favor? That's carried. And move on to consent agenda. We have item 6.1. To get the number, it's a lot, 6.31, and that includes the council minutes from last meeting. Does anyone want to see anything pulled for discussion? Councilor Dean Trent-Covey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would like to pull item 6.12 Township of Carlow Mayor motion of support for Bill 5.
Okay. Anything else that anyone wants to see looked at? Okay, can we deal with that now and then we'll just reserve it?
Okay, so I would like to introduce a motion that the county endorse the Township of Carlow Mayo's support for motion of support for Bill 5.
Well, I have a seconder for that, Councilor Kassenberg. Any discussion on that motion? Those in favor? That's carried. Okay, so we're going to go back to a motion that council receives the council agenda item 6.1 to 6.31 and approves the April 20th, 2023 and May 4th, 2023 council minutes. Moved by Councilor McKenzie, second by Councilor Orr. Last chance for discussion. Those in favor? That's carried. Perfect. Moving on. Public meetings, hearings, and delegations. And first we have the planning public meeting for OPA 213. And we will need to go recess to do that. So I need, and the motion is that regular council recess for the purpose of holding the planning public meeting at approximately 9:06. Councilor Kassenberg, Councilor Smith. Those in favor? Carried. Okay, so next on the agenda. Paperwork. Okay, I need a motion that the planning public meeting May 18th, 2023 agenda be approved. Councilor Trent-Covey, Councilor Orr. Those in favor? That's carried. And before we get into the actual meeting, we have we have minutes from the April 6th, and the motion is council approves the minutes for the April 6th, 2023 planning public meeting. Councilor McDermott, Seconded by Counselor. Any discussion on that? Any comments? Those in favor? That's carried. I gotta say, it's a lot easier doing this when I got everybody here and not screen here and everybody else. Oh, it's nice. Okay, so. We have reports and receiving comments. For OPA 213.
Okay, Jeff Banner.
Jeff Bannon is going to be the presenter on this from the county. Oh, yeah. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest. So now or at any point in time through this. Yeah.
Thank you. So this public meeting is intended to receive comments from the public for consideration of the Perth County Official Plan Amendment number 213. The lands are 11.59 hectares and the property is adjacent to the settlement boundary in Milverton. Is located on the west side of Perth Road 131 between line 61 and Wilfred Street. The site is irregularly shaped and is also adjacent to the terminus of Temperance Street. Slide, please. The property is abutting agricultural fields to the west, the Perth East Recreation Complex to the north, single detached dwellings and commercial to the east, and the Rod and Gun Club, and a woodlot and industrial subdivision on the other side of the road to the south. Subject lands are designated as Special Policy A, which is agricultural, urban fringe, natural resources environment in the Perth County Official Plan. The applicant is requesting that the Milverton settlement area is expanded to include those lands into the Milverton Ward Official Plan. Special Policy Area A allows for industrial type uses that are subject to the industrial policies in the Milverton Ward Official Plan. Policy supports a range of industrial uses, with lighter industrial uses being located closest to any neighboring residential uses. Road access to the subject lands is intended to be provided from Perth Road 131. The official plan designates the lands that are located adjacent to that road as urban fringe. Intent of the designation is to prevent the spread of non-farm related development beyond the limits of the designation. The designation is also intended to establish policies for dealing with development until such time as the lands are incorporated into the overall servicing and growth strategy of the neighboring serviced urban area. Amendment to the County of Perth official plan is intended to bring the subject lands into the Milverton settlement area and to redesignate those lands as serviced urban area. The developers also submitted an official plan amendment for the Milverton official plan to designate a portion of the property for residential uses and a portion of the property for light industrial or commercial uses. Next slide, please. Several reports have been submitted with the applications. There's been a planning justification report, scoped environmental impact study, a traffic brief, a functional servicing report, stormwater management report, MDS1 calculation worksheet has been completed, and an archaeological assessment has been done. Next slide. The applicant has also submitted applications for a plan of subdivision and a zoning bylaw amendment to the township of Perth East. The plan of subdivision is intending to develop the property with 72 residential dwelling units, which include 27 single detached dwellings, 28 semi-detached dwellings, and 17 street townhomes. Subdivision plan also includes commercial blocks, which there are 2 of them, 2 industrial commercial blocks to the south, and 5 new streets and 1 new walkway. The zoning bylaw amendment is intended to establish a residential medium density R2 zone with special provisions, a residential density R3 zone, also with special provisions, highway commercial, a holding provision, industrial with a holding provision, natural resources environment zone 2, and institutional zones. Next slide, please. Public meeting was held on Tuesday at the Township of Perth East. Perth East Council resolved to receive both of the reports that were presented. Several members of the public spoke at the council meeting on Tuesday, and they focused on concerns relating to access to the subdivision, drainage, noise, and the need for revisions to the plans that have not clearly identified the applications. One letter of opposition was received prior to the meeting from the Milverton and District Rod and Gun Club. They expressed concern that the proposed development is incompatible with their existing operation and that the proximity of the development to their operation would result in a lot of noise complaints that would relate from the discharge of firearms on their property. Second letter was also received and signed by 8 area residents, but unfortunately wasn't included with the agenda for that public meeting report. The letter identified concerns with protection of environmental sensitive areas, the cost of providing infrastructure to the development, traffic and safety next to the recreation center, municipal drain connections, access to the properties from the west, and environmental concerns. The letter was provided to Perth East Council and to the County of Perth Clerk. And if we could display that letter now on the screen, that would be helpful. Thank you. As we're pulling that letter up and presenting it on the screen, I just wanted to note that 3 members of the public have been in contact with myself since Tuesday's public meeting. And I understand that some of the questions raised in the letter were not addressed. So planning intends to address those concerns and discuss those with the respondents before the meeting with the applicant that we will discuss following today's public meeting. And then we'll discuss next step with those applications. In response to the questions that were raised on this letter, I can confirm that we will ensure that the plans included in the future planning report will reflect the entire development, and those plans will be updated and revised as necessary. Noise concerns and traffic will also be discussed with the applicant following this meeting, and lot grading, drainage, and servicing will be discussed with the township's engineering consultant. We will provide a detailed analysis with the next planning report that is brought forward. I can confirm that the applicant is intending to provide a commercial land use on the east side of the development and an industrial land use immediately to the north of the woodlot. Blocks 54 and 55 are intended to be set as reserves as part of the subdivision plan to control development and access to the adjacent properties. The development block that is shown on the plan is actually intended to be used for stormwater management. That is central to the plan of subdivision. And construction access will be discussed with public works staff, and it could be restricted to be accessed through Road 131 through conditions in the subdivision agreement. So concerns raised at each of the public meetings will be discussed and analyzed in future planning reports that will be brought forward to Perth East Council and to the County of Perth Council. I'm available to answer any questions that council may have or from the public.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff at this point? Councillor Kassenberg.
Can you stipulate the residential density that's proposed in the residential component of this?
If it's not already included in the report, I don't have that number in front of me, but I will provide you with that number with our analysis with the future reports.
Other questions? Don't see any. So we have delegations, I believe. Okay, so first we're going to ask for those in favor of the application. I believe Carolyn Baker is going to do that. Or you are the applicant for the.
Good morning to the chair, members of County Council. My name is Caroline Baker from Baker Planning Group. I'm representing the owner with respect to the applications before you this morning. I also have Jamie Dick, the project manager and engineer on the file from MTE to assist with answering any questions that may arise. Certainly you'll see our presentation in front of you. I'll try to skip over those that Mr. Bannon has already covered, but if you could go to the next slide, please. I did just want to identify the owner, Jeff and Angie Bateman. Jeff is here with us today. Should you have any questions for him. The project team consisted of myself from Baker Planning Group, engineering and survey work from MTE. Traffic brief was prepared by Traffic Mobility. NRSI prepared the environmental impact study and Stantec prepared the archaeological work. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the site and air photo. Just wanted to provide a little bit of a greater context to put this property in perspective. It is located on the south side of the Milverton urban boundary. However, it is located between the new development. I know that you're familiar with Percon, which is to the south. So this would be the intervening land between the Percon subdivision and the current boundary of the Milverton settlement area. As noted, there is some scattered urban fringe residential uses along Perth Road 131, which would be to the right or the east side of the subject property. To the north, low density residential and the recreation complex. And to the west would be the agricultural area, also outside the urban boundary. So next slide, please. These are photos of the property looking from Temperate Street, looking south. You'll see in the bottom picture on the left are the rear yards of existing dwellings. And on the right side of the picture, you'll see the existing woodlot that's proposed for protection. Next slide, please. This is the proposed draft plan of subdivision that would implement the initial plan that's before you this morning. We have provided some color highlights just to draw attention to the various land uses. The plan was intentionally designed to address land use compatibility as well as environmental protection. Certainly as we head, and I apologize, it's rotated, so north towards Milverton is the right side of the page. But essentially the residential uses were placed immediately abutting the existing residential and the recreational complex. It then transitions into two commercial blocks, which is sort of in a light, we'll call it block 46 and 47. So those would be two smaller commercial blocks that would provide transition. Then we move into the blue is the stormwater management pond. The purple is the two light industrial lots. And the green that you see would be the protected area. So that is woodland and wetland that would be protected from development along with the required buffers that were recommended by the environmental consultants. A number of new streets you'll see, one connecting to Temperance and one connecting to Road 131. It's envisioned that the connection to Road 131 would be the primary access into this development, and the access to Temperance would provide a secondary connection. It is not the most direct route out of the subdivision, and the traffic study therefore concluded that the main road access would be Street C. But just a little bit more detail on this plan. Certainly the application has proposed a holding provision in the zoning on those lots that are commercial and industrial. And the reason for that is the exact use isn't known at this time, meaning the exact business. Well, the zoning permits a range of uses. Different businesses have different noise generators, for example. Their HVAC could be in a different location. And so what the holding provision will do is when somebody comes forward with a specific use and they require site plan approval, they will be required to do a land use compatibility and noise study to ensure that there is no negative impact on surrounding residential uses. And that'll have to come back to council for consideration. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the proposed units, which I believe Mr. Bannon covered. But to answer the question with respect to density, the residential density is proposed at 20.47 units per hectare. Certainly with policies coming from the province, the single detached dwellings could certainly be eligible for second or third additional rental units in those properties should those owners choose. What you'll note at the bottom is about 7.58 hectares are proposed to be designated as urban and in the urban boundary. The remaining 4 hectares would be natural environment and protected from development. Next slide, please. This provides a brief summary of the official plan amendments before you and the proposed land use designations, which I believe have been covered. Next slide. This outlines the implementing zoning bylaw and the requested zones. There are site-specific provisions that are being requested. They generally relate to matters such as side yard setbacks, in keeping with a number of recent developments in Perth East, as well as surrounding lower tiers in the county of Perth, to reflect current design standards for new development. Next slide. Just wanted to jump in for a brief overview on the technical studies. I would note from the concerns raised by area residents, that studies have been done to address the comments received. However, our understanding is the county is currently having those peer reviewed. We're just waiting for comments back. So we look forward to retaining or receiving those comments and working through anything that is raised and then brought back to council. The first was the environmental impact study, and this largely related to the woodland and wetland, which you'll see outlined on the screen. The blue line would be the wetland, and then the solid green line is the boundary of the woodlot, and the dashed green line is the required buffer to the woodlot to provide separation and protection. Next slide, please. With respect to traffic, so as indicated, vehicles are directed to road 131. The study concluded that no roadway improvements were required, and that there's direct and convenient pedestrian connections throughout the subdivision and to the greater community. Again, in keeping with the environmental study, we understand that the traffic work is being peer reviewed, and we look forward to receiving those comments as we move through the processing of these applications. Next slide, please. Servicing, MTE did prepare a functional servicing report and stormwater management. Essentially, that stormwater management, of course, pre-flows has to equal post-flows. Certainly, we can get into a bit more detail, but the stormwater management design does incorporate existing drainage routes from surrounding properties. So those drainage routes are being maintained and coordinated through the plan. Sanitary service will be to Temperance with a new pump station and water service to Road 131. Certainly, if the applications are approved, detailed engineering design will follow through the subdivision registration process. Next slide, please. With respect to other studies, of course, fulfilling the requirements of the provincial policy statement for an urban boundary expansion and distance separation calculations were undertaken and deemed to be satisfied. Stage 1 archaeological was cleared by the province, now complete, and the site is located outside any wellhead protection areas. Next slide. Moving on to the planning opinion and planning justification report. It was concluded that the site is appropriate for an urban boundary expansion. The test for an urban boundary expansion stems first and foremost from the provincial policy statement and then the county official plan. As you're aware, the county has prepared growth forecast numbers through the Watson report in both 2020 and 2022. And there has been an allocation or recommended allocation, I apologize, to Milverton with respect to the need for additional housing. And the proposed land to come into the urban boundary is well within the number that is proposed for Milverton, and in fact does not take all of the land that's proposed for the settlement area, but a portion of it. If we take the number from 2020, which this site certainly fit within in terms of growth boundary, as I understand the 2022 numbers from Watson almost doubled the growth protection needs, and there may be more depending on the county official plan allocated to Milverton. This site is a little bit unique in that it's designated prime agricultural and it's outside the urban boundary. In fact, its permitted uses are industrial. This is a historical special policy area that was applied to the site. In this view, the current permitted uses are in fact urban in nature. It was just left outside the settlement boundary. We see this as an opportunity to clarify the designation of this property, given its permissions for urban uses, and bring it into the urban boundary, but also provide a connection to Percon, because Percon is an urban development as well. And this provide for seamless connection and extension of the Milverton settlement area. The site's already bordered on 3 sides by non-farm uses and essentially represents a whole in the Milverton settlement area. Next slide, please. Further, we concluded that the applications are appropriate, represent good land use planning, and are in the public interest. There's been a demonstrated need for additional urban uses, industrial and residential in the community. The mix of land uses addresses land use compatibility. We do note and are in receipt of the comments from the gun club. Certainly the owner has reached out on several occasions to try and meet and discuss their concerns with them, and is open to continuing to move forward with them to look at solutions and options to address their concerns. Of note, though, the gun club is about 285 meters from the first residential lot. This is a fairly sizable distance when we look at ministry requirements for separation of what we would call industrial or noxious uses to a sensitive land use. And then concluded, of course, that there's appropriate protection for natural environment, safe transportation access, and available servicing. Next slide. I'm just going to leave this up if that's okay, or you can move to a different slide, but I thought this might be helpful if there's any specific questions about the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Questions for Caroline, Councillor Kassenberg first, then Councillor Smith.
Can you point out to me where the gun club is relative to this?
Of course, if you look on the far left, to the left of block 52, I know that's a bit fuzzy. Thank you. It's that block, the heavily treed area.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Ms. Baker. Just a point of clarification, you had mentioned that a noise study is required. If I recall, Planner Bannon, at his presentation Tuesday night at Perth East, a noise study was not required. So just some clarification on that, please.
Through the chair, and thank you for asking that clarification question. So essentially there would be we're talking about two different noise studies. So the noise study I mentioned in my presentation would be a future noise study for the proposed commercial and industrial blocks within this plan, being the purple and the pink, for when the use is identified. It's very challenging to prepare a noise study when you don't know what the exact use is. So the applications propose a holding symbol that no development can occur within the subdivision on the pink and the purple until an appropriate noise study has been completed. So that's sort of one bucket or one type of noise study. The second noise study that's been brought up is by the gun club itself, which is outside the plan of subdivision. And my understanding is they're requesting a noise study as part of the application that's before you today to permit the designation of these lands. The comment you would have received at council on Tuesday night was that a noise study was not required for this development to assess the gun club.
Thank you.
Other questions, Councillor McDermott?
Yeah, at Perth East the other night, they were talking about a retaining wall. Where's the retaining wall?
Through the chair, the retaining wall would be on the far west side, and sort of Jamie can assist me, but it'll be sort of in the area if you see Street D, lot 23. So across that, so if you move your cursor up, thank you for helping. So keep going up. Yep. Keep going up a little bit more along the property line. Essentially, the requirement for a retaining wall is that in order to get the positive drainage flow, the site needs to be raised to drain to the south. So it'll get raised and drained to the south to reach the stormwater management pond. So the way the stormwater works is the majority of the site is draining to the swim block, which is blue. So it gets raised, has to basically be tilted to drain to that swim pond, and of course, move the water away from any neighboring property owners. Oh, so got one there. Sorry, I'll let him. Go ahead.
So sorry, Caroline is correct that the property is being raised. But the retaining wall is actually side the street and sort of along the entrance of Street C there, in order to maintain the existing elevations across the back of those properties and maintain their drainage. The ground has to stay low. But the site is being raised to direct sanitary discharge towards Temperance. So retaining Street C above the existing elevations.
Councillor Krenkowski, you got a question?
I did through you, Chair. Caroline, for the residential units proposed, asking about the accessory residential occupancy, will that be possible in the future? Like one residence would be able to have an occupant in the upper floor and a separate occupant in the basement. Is that a potential future residential use? Or
Through the chair, certainly it is. And with Bill 23, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a movement to allow up to 3 units on any single, semi, or townhouse lot that has available servicing. The one caveat, of course, is you have to ensure that there's appropriate parking. So it's 1 additional parking space per additional residential unit, and the main unit has to meet the primary parking requirements. But there is certainly some width in those lots to be able to accommodate parking.
and one further supplemental question, Mr. Chair, then think I saw on one of the earlier pages of the report that the density was almost 21 units per hectare. So conceivably with accessory dwelling possibilities, the actual occupancy. In terms of residents per hectare, it could be more than just. It would be higher than just if it was a single occupancy per lot.
Through that chair, that is certainly possible, yes.
Right, thank you.
Other questions? I don't see any hands coming up now. Thank you, Caroline. I'm sure you're going to stick around in case something pops up. And now we have another delegate here. The William Miller. So actually, first I'm going to ask, is there anyone here to speak in favor of this application? See anybody jump up? Okay, anybody wants to speak against this application? So I have a William Miller. I'm assuming that would be maybe you. Okay, so usually when you make a presentation here, you have basically 10 minutes. I need some time for questions.
Sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing.
10 minutes max.
Okay, I have the slot for the rod and gun, and I also have the slot for because I'm a joint downstream stakeholder,
You get one for each one.
and I booked in 2 minutes time. I'll incorporate them together.
Well, that's even better. Thank you.
Pass these along, please. My copies. We're all together. Thank you. Didn't quite prepare a PowerPoint since I wasn't, didn't have enough time or capacity to do that. Thank you for your time today. Oh, sorry. Thank you for your time today. I live at 486 line 59 in Mornington Ward. The reason I'm here today, I'm representing the 184 owners with no rod and gun, plus the farmers, some farmers, and if you need their names, I can certainly pass that on to you. My background is agriculture. I have been involved in the agricultural industry for 35 years. I've been involved in planning structurals to protect the environment regarding pesticide storage. In fact, the three of us who planned the bulk standards for pesticides for Canada, none of us were engineered, and now the company that I work for uses them worldwide. I've also been involved, unfortunately, in litigation regarding agriculture dust. And I was also involved in the group where we had a spill and cleaned up, and then 35 years later on our site in Cambridge, by building on it, we suddenly found out we own everything in the ground, and the pumping process and the clearing process environmentally just finished in 2013 for 1985. So I have some basic understandings and implications of cost. Before I begin on the exact thing, I did have the opportunity to speak with a person involved with municipal affairs in Toronto. I know that Perth County has looked at us as a tier 2, and the main drive for housing is in regions versus tier 2 counties. And the basic reason behind that is infrastructure. We believe in Toronto that the infrastructure is better for schools, hospitals, roads, et cetera, et cetera. So in this process, we need to do it right. We need to do it right first time. I see there's been some additions to the Baker report since I originally found it online. And it's very nice to find an actual name and a face for the Baker document. The original document does not contain an author or stamp that was available online from county offices. And the Baker report is the justification that we're here today. Noise. The Rod and Gun has known that there's been many clubs closed. Linwood, Pioneer, St. Agatha, and a couple others. And the last one was the Tavistock Club, which has suffered economic impact from having one range closed and having to build a concrete gun shooting house to contain the noise. They were an existing club. The property owner moved into the property next door, objected, and caused the issue. We'd like to preempt that. We don't want to get into that. I've known Jeff Bannon for a long time, and this is a multi-million-dollar project that Jeff is wanting to enter in, and I know Jeff wants to enter in it correctly without impacting the community. Jeff and I have communicated a couple of times, mostly by email, but we haven't had the opportunity in the last while to talk. That's one of the issues. Second issues within the MTA report, there's a recommendation for fencing. Protect the bush, protect the rod and gun. That has to be cleaned up. Fencing should be mandatory in that aspect. But the third thing is what happens to the water flow. I have to find my note. Just for the record, 1 inch of rainfall produces 21,714 imperial gallons of water. The annual rainfall in this specific area is 36.8 inches. Site draining towards the Rod and Gun and draining into the McCloy drain based on the drawings is 16 acres. That means in a year, there's 12,500,000 and some odd thousand gallons of water being contained on hard surfaces, moving into a retention pond, finally entering the McCloy drain. The report, I have it here. The natural resources report, I don't think is properly completed. It was done in a short period of time. You'll see from that one picture, we have migratory birds going through the property. You'll also see in the report that there is one bird species on the endangered list. Now, certainly Perth East and probably Perth County knows the effect that one bird watcher can do when we lost the municipal dump in Ellis Township and the amount of money that was cost there. The implications of changing the water flow changes the flow of water across the environmentally protected lands and into the Rod and Gun. And you'll find the pictures for the rod and gun, number 3. And the natural resource group captures the water as swamp. Well, the question is, without a hydrological study, are we going to dry up the swamp? Are we going to affect the ecology of the swamp? And I'm not so sure we want to get involved with any environmental groupings. I can tell you that is absolutely no fun. Go on further. The impact of water on agriculture. Currently, the McCloy drain takes water from the east side of Melbourne and part of the east side of Melbourne and the south side and the agricultural land bounding it and joins up with the Hunter drain. The Hunter drain is basically the main discharge from Melbourne stormwater. Historically, Melbourne has known that their storm sewer system has no capacity to hold water back. In fact, the storm sewers blew off down at the Perth Recreation Center one year and flooded the Perth Recreation Center. And here we are adding more water directed from a hard surface, not being absorbed in the typical soil structure that it normally was. The impact on myself as a farmer is flooding. This isn't actually my field, but this captures what the flooding does when the ditch overflows. Those municipal ditches were built late 1800s, added on to in the 1900s, and all that's ever been done with those municipal ditches is cleaning out the bottom at the request of farmers. And when those original ditches were built, there was no understanding in the capacity of adding the type of drainage that we do on farmland today. And agriculture has the right for drainage. But agriculture under the Drainage Act protects one person from dumping water on another person. And there's a cost lost here. Wheat has a gross of about 1,200 acres. Soybeans about to $1,400 an acre currently. Corn, a little bit higher. We increase the water capacity, flow capacity, without correcting it. Who's going to absorb the damages? Once this is approved, this all drops back onto the municipality. I don't think we want to go there. The water released on the MTE report goes on to what they classify as wetlands. The wetlands are putting 16 acres of hard surface water into a retention pond, then onto roughly about 1.5 acres of land. And then it is flowing from that land through overland, through ditches along the roadside. And in this particular case, there's 2 pictures here of the corner of line 61. The one indicates where the drainage flow will be. The second one is the present sewer capacity of getting the water underneath the road. That's figure number 4. And when you look at the report, we're draining from 80 millimeters to 300 millimeters drains. So let's accept that the water flows through there and flows through the McCloy. That's one issue. The other half of the property absorbs through the Hunter drain. The McCloy drain and the Hunter drain connect. And because of the elevation of Milverton, the McCloy drain does not release its water until the Hunter drain is discharged based on natural elevation and pressure. So what we really need to do is ensure that those drainage are of the proper capacity, that there isn't an economic impact to agriculture. So in summary, I believe the process of changing agricultural land into any type of structure currently is flawed. It looks specifically at the site, but does not necessarily change the impact around the site. And back to reflecting noise, this is a noise meter. Ministry of Environment standards are the normal conversation is 60 decibels. The conversation of that's allowable, a maximum standard is 65. Simple meter like this, it isn't professional, so don't get me wrong. But indicates that the noise level at the back of the Perth Rec Center ranges in that 65 to 70 decibels, depending on wind, direction, and type of firearms used. We certainly don't want people in houses coming home from work, sitting out on their balcony and being disturbed, or their kids being disturbed. There's a suggestion by the Baker Group about putting a Burma for sound. If that's the direction that it sounds to go, you need a guarantee that that will contain the sound. The preferred, but probably a little more expensive, is to build a shooting house that contains noise in the first place. And we're a nonprofit organization. We don't have the financial resources to do it. So I thank you for your time. And I will pass my notes to Mr. Bannon. I promised him that. I know he's new on this portfolio. And hopefully the group will decide to get the correct studies done and the information provided to negate any issues, the adjoining properties and downstream, and as agricultural downstream. So I know Jeff wants to move forward with this development, and I'm in support of development, the right development that doesn't impact the surrounding community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Miller, Brad. You're Mr. Miller. You are Mr. Miller?
Yep.
Okay, just before you walk away, any questions for Mr. Miller on his presentation? Don't see any hands up. Must have been thorough.
Okay, well, I have one more bit of information. The retaining walls are built for three things. The young lady said for drainage. It also allows the builder to have successful lot size. And I do have, the retaining wall isn't impacting me or the Rod and Gun Club. One question that came up in my mind is, who owns a retaining wall 10 years down the road? Who repairs it? Who corrects it? I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to speak in opposition? I have a hand up over there. I'll let you come up to the table. You could state your name and the address too for comments. You could state your name and your address because we need that for the record.
Rita Schneiker.
Yeah.
7 Temperance Street in Overton.
Thank you.
So I'm here today as a resident and representing the neighborhood of this proposed development. We're not opposed to development. We too just want to see it done properly. We sent a letter back in December to planning, which unfortunately has been shuffled, I believe, as a result of staff changes. So that was very discouraging for us to start with. So Jeff did a good explanation. He brought it up, and I understand I will get answers to our questions. But I just wanted to raise 3 of the main issues that we have as residents. The first being, sorry, you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
The first being the access road that comes in off the highway. We would hope that that access road would be fully completed prior to any construction. The existing road leading onto Temperance Street is called Wilfred, and that's a very small and narrow street. At the end, we have our playground, a swimming pool, and Perth, our activity center. So we don't want to see construction equipment coming through that narrow streets and small neighborhood to access the building of this property. So our first wish is that that access road would be fully completed prior to construction or development of this area. The second, you've heard many times, drainage issues and elevation issues. There are certain drains that were constructed just within the last few years. The Ryder Q municipal drain, which currently drains backyards, which would abut to this property. We haven't seen any plans for drainage, and that is a big concern to us. In our backyards, it's wet. This land was previously tiled. So we are concerned that water does not build up in any of the existing backyards. We haven't seen nor heard of where this drain could be relocated. And based on the current setup for the subdivision, we question if that drain has been considered. So that's of a big concern. When we raise elevation, it also concerns us with water. So we need to see responsible drainage for this property, key area. The third, which you've heard, is the proximity and noise from the existing rod and gun. If you live in Milverton, yeah, we hear gunshots, and I think we've kind of come to tolerate it. I don't know if new residents to the area are going to be so accepting. So that's of concern because we're wanting to have a development, and then people might complain, which then creates excess burden on the rod and gun. So we're just not sure what new residents will think. And we wanted to let you know that the noise concern, although we tolerate it, which we do, we think could be problematic for new residents. So we spoke with Perth East on Tuesday night, met with Jeff. I'm assured that we'll get an answer to many more questions that the residents had, but I just wanted to come out and represent the neighbors, the community. We're for development, but we'd like to see some more drainage and answers to some of our issues, maybe prior to being excited about this development. So that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Well, thank you very much. Questions for this presenter before she gets away on us? Councillor Kazenberg.
You commented about the getting used to the noise in the gun club in the existing neighborhood. How much further away from the gun club are you, in your home, for example, than the proposed residential components of this subdivision?
I'm right at the corner of the proposed development, which would be the northwest corner of the property, sorry, northeast corner of the property.
Okay, so you're sort of roughly in line with where some of these new homes might be.
Oh yeah, my neighbor will be the first lot, which is on the subdivision.
Okay. Councillor Krajewski.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what was the name of, was it the Pew Drain or?
It's called the Ryder Q Municipal Drain. And I believe this was built about within the last 5 years because there were issues with water flow. There are two drains where it goes across the property and it goes out down Mill Street West where it's drained.
That moves water to the north then.
Correct.
Thank you.
Hey, other questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else want to speak with regards to this application? I think we're good now. Okay. Well, thank you. That's why we're having this planning public meeting, so people can have their say and all their comments will be taken into consideration before a final decision is made. So at this point in time, I just have a motion here that the council receives the Perth County Official Plan Amendment number 213 -1803-018, Carroll Inc. report for lands described as Lot 6, Concession 3, Melbourne Ward, Township of Perth East. And that council receives comments from the public for consideration regarding official plan amendment number 213 to the County of Perth official plan affecting lands described as Lot 6, Concession 3, Melbourne Ward, Township of Perth East. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Duncan, Councillor Smith. Those in favor? That's carried. Perfect, so. We've got that, and now we can adjourn the public meeting at 9:57. Motion by Councillor McDermott, seconded by Councillor McKenzie. Those in favor? That's carried. Okay, so we're gonna go back into regular session here. And next is the presentation of the Thames Sydenham source water protection. Oh, yeah, motion to reconvene into regular council at 9:08. All right, Councillor Orr, Councillor Trentowski, those in favor? Carried. And now we are going to do, we have John Bowes. Yep. Perfect. City of Stratford, this presentation for us.
To the chair, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'll try not to take up too much of your time. So I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Johnny Bowes, Manager of Environmental Services for the City of Stratford. I've been there for about 3 years now. Previous to that, I was at the region of Halton for about 11 years. I was recently reappointed by the municipal representatives for a new 4-year term to be the representative member of Huron County, Perth County, St. Mary's and Stratford for the Source Water Protection Committee. So what I wanted to come and present today is explaining what the committee is, what my role is in relation to Perth County, and then happy to take any questions after that. And yeah, next slide, please. So I'll start with a little bit of background. I'm not sure how familiar some of you are with source water protection and how it relates to your municipality. So I just want to give a bit of a general background to it before I lead in. So source water protection, it all starts with the Clean Water Act, which was enacted in 2006. And it was one of the 121 recommendations made by Justice O'Connor after the Walkerton tragedy of 2000. So those recommendations are essentially the building blocks of the Ontario Drinking Water Protection Framework. And the most critical piece of that is the Clean Water Act, because the concept of that is protection of where you're drawing your water from, which was the initial issue of Walkerton. The source water was not protected, and it led to obviously a public epidemic. So under this legislation, the Drinking Water Source Program was established by the provincial government, and it is administered by the MECP, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. And what this protection program is, it's a comprehensive framework for the concept that we commonly refer to as source to tap. So if I can refer to the full image on the slide here, source to tap is essentially step one, your source water, whether it's a lake or an underground aquifer or a well. You draw the water, you treat it, you inspect the water you've treated, you test it, you distribute it out to your system, and eventually it gets to your tap. So that's the concept that this framework is trying to protect. Very simple, but obviously with the issues that happened in Walkerton, simple things need comprehensive frameworks to make sure they're operating properly. So, and this protection program resulted in the development of local source protection plans. So Ontario's 36 conservation authorities have legislative roles under the Clean Water Act. And they're also grouped into 19 source protection areas. So ours, for example, is the Thames Sydenham and Region Source Protection Region, which is made up of the Lower Thames Valley Source Protection Authority, the St. Clair Region, and the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I just mentioned, ours is the Thames Sydenham Region Source Protection Area. So this map here kind of gives an overview of our specific area, which obviously includes myself, City of Stratford, Huron, Perth County, and St. Mary's, among many others, but more specifically the Upper Thames. So our region is made up of the watersheds of these conservation areas. And a watershed, it's an area of land that's drained by river or creeks into a body of water, such as a lake or a large river. Watersheds can cross many township, provincial, or even national boundaries. In our case, the main bodies of water for this discharge are Lake Huron, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Erie. So under the Clean Water Act, the Upper Thames River, Lower Thames Valley, and St. Clair Region Conservation Authorities entered into a partnership for this region. Slide, please. So the source protection plans themselves. So through the Clean Water Act, a committee was established to guide the process to develop these source protection plans to protect municipal sources of drinking water. So what these plans have done, they've determined areas in these regions that are vulnerable to drinking water threats. They've identified the potential threats and they developed source protection plans to deal with these threats to our drinking water sources. These protection plans are what we call a live document. So they're ongoing, they're evolving as legislation changes. We have to update the source protection plan as new industry comes in, as changes to the watershed happen, that sort of thing. So it's constantly ongoing and evolving. It's a process that uses a science-based approach to identify vulnerable areas. So if I'm just picking a general example, if there was a spot that used to have a gas station, maybe back in the 60s or 70s, that falls on top of a wellhead protection area. That's a site that would be identified as a vulnerable threat because there could be contamination in that ground. So it's one of the things that has to be monitored by the conservation officials. It's a framework that's developed to focus on the development of locally driven source protection plans. The source protection plan took many years to develop from scratch because it was a lot of having to go through every site and every property and every municipality and every wellhead protection area program to identify where these threats actually are. How severe they are. They were all rated and they were all meeting with residents. So it took many, many years to develop it. And the first volume was released in 2015, most recently updated in 2021, and we have some 2022 changes coming soon. And these source protection plans are all available online through the Thames Sydenham Region authorities. If you ever want to reference them. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, already there. So these are just some excerpts from the source protection plan to give you an idea for Perth County specifically. So this one here, it shows the wellhead protection areas at a few of the different sites. So a wellhead protection area is basically what the title says. If your municipality has a well water source taken from an aquifer, there has to be a protected area around that. And how they determine that is by the time of travel that it takes water to recharge into the ground aquifer. And then that determines wellhead protection area A is always the immediate 100 meters surrounding the well. So if I'm using, for example, the one in Tavistock, you can see the red dot with the green around it. That's where the well is physically located. And then outside that, you can see different layers of circles that show different ranges. But essentially, the entire boundary, all those protection areas, is what we're most concerned with source water protection. Next slide, please. And then here's a couple more examples. St. Mary's, St. Paul's and Severinville, they've got extremely small limited water systems. So it's just one small well treated and it's just distributed to a couple hundred residents. So for Perth County specifically, the focus is on wellhead protection areas because most, if not all, I believe, of your drinking water does come from groundwater aquifers. If you're in a conservation area that borders on Lake Erie or Lake St. Clair or Lake Huron, their concern is what's called an intake protection zone. So it's essentially the same concept as the surrounding of the wellhead protection area, but it's where the pipe is physically located in those lakes where they're drawing the water in. They've got a big boundary outside of them that, certain types of boats can't pass through, like things like that. So not really applicable to here, but just to kind of help give you an example of those protection zones. Next slide, please. And yeah, here's just one more example in Mitchell. And you can see how the wellhead protection areas are all separate for each well, but how they vary based on the land structure, geographically where they're located. Next slide, please. So the Source Protection Committee itself. So as I mentioned, I'm the representative for City of Stratford, Town of St. Mary's, Perth County, and Huron County. The region has 15 voting members plus the chair and a representative for conservation authorities, the health units, First Nations, and the ministry. The committee is responsible for guiding the development of our local source protection plan. An important part of this process is public and stakeholder involvement. That's why there's so many different stakeholders that are involved in this committee, right? So there's agricultural, industrial, commercial, general public, First Nations, health unit, and then obviously the municipal. So it does cover a very broad range, and the meetings are excellent because you get a really good understanding of these different groups that you normally wouldn't affiliate with as much, right? So for myself to hear the point of views from the agricultural side of things, it's really interesting for me to understand their side of things and how they view source protection. Next slide, please. So this is just showing the mission statement. So the very first thing when the committee was created in 2007, before they did any source protection plan, they created a mission statement. The statement principle still remains. However, it's more now about ongoing development of these source protection plans than it is about the original development of the plan. And as I mentioned before, these risk assessments are always changing, new legislation, new significant drinking water threats are coming out. So next slide, please. And then again, yeah, so for the municipal representation itself, for the last several terms, the representative for this committee has been the manager of environmental services for the city of Stratford. And I was just reappointed, as I mentioned, for another 4 years. Perth and Huron counties are a little unique in this situation because the geographical boundaries make them part of other source water regions. So there may be involvement with this group with not just myself, but other conservation authorities as well. So my role in this will be to provide updates from the committee to the respective municipalities that I'm representing. So what I intend to do moving forward is to, after we have these meetings about 3-4 times a year, I bring forward the minutes. I'll send it to the representatives from the different municipalities. And if they have anything specific that they want me to bring up at these meetings, I'm more than happy to be the representation for that. That being said, a lot of the big changes that happen within a municipality are already caught without having to go through me. So for example, if you were putting in a new well in Tavistock, which I believe recently happened or is happening, that's something that goes through the MECP and then gets flagged by our protection committee, and then it gets discussed at our meetings. So it's good because there's a couple of catch-alls to make sure we're getting everything that happens. If I don't get all the information from something, it still comes through the different channels to the protection. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of the most recent committee meeting we had in March 24th. I'll be sending a more fulsome report to the actual representatives, but just to kind of go over the types of things that are discussed, the annual report presented from the Upper Thames, salt storage policy update. So that's one of those things that legislation is evolving and changing that we need to be aware of. Salt storage capacity, how it impacts where those locations are they on source water protection areas? Yeah, World Water Day, just general things like that. I believe that's all I have for now. Next slide. But one thing I did want to point out to this group, and I'm not sure if any of you have taken it or some of you have, it's very encouraged that all councillors and municipal representatives, or sorry, operating authorities take what's called the standard of care training. It's offered by the Walkerton Clean Water Center. And the recommendation is that every time there's a new council that comes in, it's training that they take so that councillors and mayors and directors understand what their roles are with source water protection, because there are legal responsibilities. There's financial implications that do fall on council representatives. So it's an extremely good course. I've taken it twice now, but we just took it as part of the orientation with the new City of Stratford Council. It's a mandatory thing as part of their onboarding. And so I do recommend that if you haven't taken it, it's a 4-hour course. It's put on by the Walkerton Clean Water Center. And it takes what I did for the first few slides, but very in depth, and it focuses on what your responsibilities are, what legally you're obligated to provide as far as protection towards this as the decision makers essentially of the municipality. So just wanted to add that as well, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. Questions, Councilor McDermott?
Yeah, the protection zones, how did they figure out where obviously you can't go and look, so how do you figure out how the water?
Yeah, so there's hydrogeological studies that have been done. So for example, the city of, they've known about these areas for many, many, many decades. But what is encouraged is that the municipalities take what's called a groundwater study. So the last time City of Stratford did one was 2002. We had Golder and Associates come in and do a full groundwater study of our jurisdiction. I'm actually planning on doing one in the next couple of years because it has been 20 years since, which isn't uncommon. It's typically the groundwater doesn't change too much, but that is something I do want to come and speak to Perth County with, because obviously watersheds don't understand borders, and we do share our aquifer and our well protection areas do spill over onto Perth County and Perth County onto City of Stratford, obviously too. So it's something that we would do in conjunction with that, but that's essentially where that information comes, is hydrogeological studies.
Would they have to like bore holes or?
So most municipalities or all that have a groundwater system, they should have what's called ground monitoring wells. So in the city of Stratford, we have 11 production wells. Those are the wells that actually are drying up and we're feeding it into the system. But throughout the city, we also have drilled monitoring wells, which we go to every week, and we take depth measurements, and that tells us where the aquifers are at. And then every year we send that data to Lotta Water is the company we use, and they're hydrologists that do, they review all of our data, and then they determine what state our aquifers are in. So that's kind of, hopefully that answers your question. That's how we do it. I'm not sure. I'm assuming most municipalities have a similar nature, because you do have to monitor your aquifer levels. And there's requirements for that.
When you look at the protection zones, some of them are very weirdly shaped.
They are, yeah.
Just how you would figure out that that's.
Right, and part of the studies, they do look originally at boreholes, like to see where bedrock is, to see where limestone is, the clay. So City of Stratford, for example, there's 40 meters of clay overburden. So we've got a very, very strong protection layer above, but it's funny, you don't have to go very far to see a big shift in what's underground, right? So it's very unique to each municipality, but essentially that's how they gather that data and information.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councilor Chinkowski, through you, Mr. Chair. So thanks for your presentation, Johnny. I had, my question was with respect to the introduction of Bill 23 last year. Bill 97 recently in April, and the proposed changes to the provincial planning statement. Has the Source Protection Committee weighed in on those changes to offer their comments or concerns about potential impacts on water quality in the future, given that the directive is for increased development?
Through the chair, that's an excellent question. It has been discussed. I believe, just as a additional business at the last meeting, I believe it is a scheduled topic for the next one. But my understanding at this point is that when new applications come through and there's anything being built in a wellhead protection area, it has to go through a process that will not be changing. Like if there's something going up in a wellhead protection area, regardless of Bill 23, it still needs to be reviewed through the proper channels in order to protect source water protection.
Other questions? Councilor Casper, question? No? I've got one. I ask it all the time when I talk to people with dealing with source water protection, and I've had discussions with Jeff Urick when he was Minister of the Environment. Everybody talks about source water protection. And I have a lot of urban friends from college and whatnot working. But I work in agriculture, I'm a farmer. And they always keep saying, well, you guys are the ones that pollute all the water. That's why there's an algae bloom down in Lake Erie. And I said, well, maybe you might want to go rethink that. Because when you have cities like Stratford and London, charging sewage, and they call those legal bypasses, the amount of loss, et cetera, that's going into that water from those bypasses would completely far exceed anything that ever came out off of an agricultural in the entire region. And actually phos, when you apply it to the ground, it sticks pretty well and it doesn't really run. And I'm sure you may have heard that conversation with some of your agricultural groups.
Mm-hmm.
So has there been anything done to reduce or limit the number of bypasses to actually clean up? Because I know I have friends that get water out of Lake Erie. I have friends that get water out of the Sydenham River. And I have friends who get water out of Lake Erie. And quite often they have to shut those things down.
Yeah. Through the chair. So bypasses and overflows at the wastewater treatment plants are, again, as you mentioned, they're common in every municipality. Plants have certain capacities that are designed for regular flows. So for example, the city of Stratford, in the upcoming months, these are the typical flows that we'll be seeing. The plant will be working at about 55% capacity because we're not going to be getting the rain that we get in the spring. What happens is it's a combination of inflow and infiltration. So it's old infrastructure that gets groundwater into the pipes. So when we get heavy snow melt, heavy rainfall, that rainwater gets into the sanitary system, eventually down to the plant, which increases flows, obviously. So the city of Stratford, we installed a number of years ago overflow tanks so that when we get very heavy flows, they go into these tanks and they sit, and then as the rain stops and the melt stops, we slowly feed it through our system. But there are times, yes, when it far exceeds that. If you have a 10-year storm or something like that, it's going to exceed it and there is going to be a bypass. Our bypass of the city is we do hit the water with chlorine, and then the water is being bypassed. And then before it goes out to the river, we dechlorinate it. We try to give it some form of treatment before it actually gets out into the system. It doesn't go through the full treatment process. You're correct. But every municipality has its own obligation to try and correct I&I and overflows. So what we do is we've had a very aggressive relining program for our sanitary system. So since 2015, we've invested quite a bit of money, and we do every year annually to reline our sewer mains to help stop that inflow. We also have a number of subsidy programs available through the city. So a lot of older homes were originally built where their weeping tiles and their drainage from their house, their downspouts were all connected to their sanitary line. So every time it rains, you're getting double the flow into those lines. So over the years, we've had a number of subsidy programs available to encourage homeowners to do that disconnection. And we also help offset most of the payment for that. And then obviously the standards now for all new development are that stormwater and sewer are completely separate. And it's been that way for a number of decades, but obviously there's many homes that were built long before those standards changed. So it's a long battle. It's very difficult to try and get ahead of it, but it's something that, fully committed to and trying to deal with it and working towards a number of programs in place to try and mitigate the amount of overflows we get. Yeah.
I just have read recently where a number of cities have had their number of bypasses increased.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Stratford had theirs increased.
Yeah, if you look at ours for the last 10 years, it just depends on the year. Like we didn't have much snow this year. We had a very mild winter, so our flows. But again, last September 22nd last year, you may or may not recall, we had 2 days of very, very, very heavy rains. That, even the best system is very different. It's almost not feasible to build a plant for a 100-year storm, right? It's not possible. So you try to mitigate that in ways you can. And for us, it was installing the overflow tanks. And a lot of municipalities have gone that way in the last 20 years, is to try and take in that water, let it sit in basically massive pools. And then when the rain goes away, slowly feed it back to your system. So there are possibilities out there, but, work with what you have and what your resources are and chip away at it.
Okay, no other questions? Thanks, Johnny. I have a motion here that council receives the Thames Source Water Protection Region presentation for implementation. Councillor Kasenberg, Councillor McDermott, those in favor, that's carried. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your time.
And next we have Caitlin Elder, Ontario Warden. Morning. 3 years I was warden, I never met you in person. Anyway, where you go?
Great. Well, thank you, Chair, through you to County Council. Great to see everyone today and in person. My name is Kate Barnes Gallagher. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus. I only say that once because it's way too many words altogether. Next slide. So we are on what we call our magical mystery tour, getting out to all of the county councils to let you know who we are in case there are new members, as well as to let you know what our strategic priorities are for 2023, 2024. So who we are the 16 upper and single tier municipalities. We are recently the 16. Haldimand County, just to the east of Brant, Norfolk, has agreed to try us on for size this year and will be reviewed at their budget this October to see about membership. for 2024. We contain 300 communities, more than 1.5 million residents, 500,000 square kilometers, and 90% of our region is rural. And we represent 20% of the population of Ontario. So we are a really significant piece of Ontario. Next slide. So why, oh yes, this is fun. So if you take the mapping and flip it, you can see that we're an elephant, really strong and mighty creature. We're smart and brave. Unfortunately, Owen Sound is in an incredibly unfortunate position. So we set our goals. Next slide. So the purpose of the Western Ontario Warrens Caucus is really to come together and speak in that one unified voice. We are that great big region. We are that elephant in Ontario, but there are so many similarities. There are differences between our communities, between our counties, but there are similarities. So when we look at the region, we're really talking about those things that we can coalesce on a regional scale. And the Warrens Caucus is that conduit from our municipalities to the provincial and federal governments. We speak on behalf of our member municipalities and represent our municipalities at the provincial and federal levels. Next slide. So how do we work and how do we provide that conduit as well as providing tools to our members? We have our caucus, so you're represented by Warden Agate and all the other wardens and mayors from those 16 members. Then we are supported by staff. I'm the full-time executive director. Then we have a part-time manager of government relations and a part-time administrative coordinator. And then we have our CAOs group that also supports the work of the caucus. From there, we have an economic development committee that's been quite active since 2017. And Perth County is well represented with Councillor McKenzie. And that group is elected officials, staff, as well as ministry and federal department representatives. So that's a great group that really drives the economic development work on a regional scale. And new this year are our subject matter expert groups. These are the groups that are aligned with our strategic priorities and are the staff teams that help inform the work that we do. They're the boots on the ground. They're the experts that help inform that. So you're represented by Sally on our planning team, with Sarah on our communications team, and Meredith on our economic development team. Next slide. So all of that work with all of those people helps inform our advocacy. And we do that with meetings with our ministers and senior government officials. So the deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers, we do that at Roma, AMO. And then we also do that with our members of parliament and members of provincial parliament. We make sure that they know what our strategic priorities are so they can be our advocates too when they are at Queen's Park and on the Hill. And we also partner with all of our regional organizations. So SCORE, so Central Ontario Regional Network, SWIFT is one of our projects, AMO, FCM, the list goes on, including the Eastern Ontario Warrens Caucus. They're an incredibly strong partner, and there are many initiatives that we work on together. Next slide. So that's on April 14th. We brought together over 50 people from the region, including the members of parliament and members of provincial parliament. And we released our strategic priorities directly, first kick at the can, to our elected officials. As I said, those elected officials are our partners on the provincial and federal scale. So we let them see our strategic priorities first out of the can. And that first issue is housing. It's a no-brainer. And what we've done on the housing piece is we've done a workforce strategy that includes housing. So we know we need 174,000 new homes in the region by 2041 to meet our growing demand. And we know by county how many homes we need as well. But what we don't know is how much the province wants us to build. The province has identified for each of our urban counterparts the pledges that they need to make to build homes, to meet the Building Homes Faster Act. So we're asking the province, how much do you expect us to build? And then we can find that perfect middle ground of how much we know and what the province expects us to build as well. We are also asking for the province's definition of what will keep municipalities whole. We know that Bill 23 took away development charges, so we want to see what that means. Recently, we've seen the audit process on those 5 GTA municipalities. So we're hopeful that that will maybe give some guidance onto what keeping municipalities whole is. And on the federal side, you may be aware of the Federal Housing Accelerator Program. And the cutoff for urban and rural is 10,000, a population of 10,000. And that's going to put most of our region into an urban context, competing against Ottawa of 1 million people or more. So we are talking to our federal counterparts to really look at that 10,000 and bump it back up to the 100,000. That is standard across the board of the divider between urban and rural. Next slide. Our second priority is workforce to support economic growth. You can't have housing without a workforce. You can't have workforce without housing. They're so intricately intertwined. And what are we asking for on the workforce piece? We are looking specifically at the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. We've worked quite closely with the Ministry of Labour, Immigration Training and Skills Development to identify those occupations that are needed in the region. Our workforce strategy shows by county the top employers and the top occupations needed out through to 2030. And we know on a regional scale what we need. We also have a job demand search that pulls every month what the top jobs are. And right now, retail is the top job posted time and time again. And so what we're pushing for is to see that, ensure that the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program is matching the jobs that are needed in our region. And further to that, on the federal side, we're making sure that the transition from temporary foreign workers to permanent residents is quicker and smoother. Those people that are working here and living here and contributing to our communities need that pathway to permanency easier and smoother. So those are the pieces on the workforce that we're looking at provincially and federally. Last but not least, next slide. Of those showcase priorities, we're looking at mental health, addictions, and homelessness. And most specifically, we're looking at the homelessness prevention program. So that is that funding that comes to our municipalities. And what we're looking at is a specific rural stream. We're not asking for taking money away from our urban counterparts. We know our urban counterparts are experiencing significant issues in mental health, addictions, and homelessness. But what we're asking for is an urban dedicated stream. We're working with our social services experts at the moment to identify the increase in usage of shelter spaces and the increase in numbers in our rural communities when it comes to homelessness, to really validate that we need a rural stream for that program. And in addition, we continue to talk about the mobile crisis response teams and that funding for the OPP and city police works to ensure that that's permanent funding. So they don't have to keep applying for that funding and have March 31st roll around and not know if that program is going to continue. We want to see that a permanent funding program. Slide. So those are our 3 showcase items that we go out to the public with for Roma and AMO and talk to the ministers on, but we continue to have our secondary priorities, if you will. So broadband continues to be critical to everything that we do. It is literally the fiber in the ground. And SWIFT continues to do that work and getting the fiber in the ground. And we are, we'll be seeing those projects, the fiber in the ground, be wrapping up in September of this year, the fall. All of that fiber will be laid. So the actual fiber in the ground will be completed. And SWIFT will continue on for the next 7 years, making sure that that fiber is providing 50-10 to all the projects that were developed. So SWIFT will continue on, but those fiber projects will be wrapped up by September. Next slide. Then we have our economic development work. So this is the work of the Economic Development Committee. Looking at the sectors, we see the EV sector is really exploding in our region with the announcements in St. Thomas and in Windsor-Essex. And what we can do as a region to support that work. There's also the work in the northern end of the county. Perth is really well situated between the EV sector as well as the nuclear sector up in Bruce County as well. So the Economic Development Committee is looking at the sector work in regards to the economic development piece. Next slide. So how do we do all this? We do it with partners. We can't do it without partners. Workforce Planning West is an incredible partner for counties planning board, and Dana are great partners there. Community Futures Western Ontario contributes to our economic development work. And Megan Marshall with Perth CFTC there is a fantastic partner, and I look forward to seeing her here shortly. We also work with the Ontario Big City Mayors. I like to say that the Ontario Big Cities are quite often the Timbits to the donuts of our counties, right? So we need to work with them in partnership. And I mentioned the Eastern Ontario Ones Caucus before. Our rural counties, whether in West or East, have a lot of similarities. And we continue to work with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. They have big policy power. And so we're able to take some of the work that they do and apply it with that Western Ontario lens. And then we see the other partners across the bottom there that we've worked specifically on projects with. Next slide. So here's some resources if you're interested in learning more or staying on top of what we do. We have a dedicated website. Many of you, I believe, are on our newsletter and press release list. We also have Twitter for the time being and Facebook as well. Next slide. So as members, we just want to reiterate what the benefits are of membership for Perth County. You have a seat at that regional table, which is so critical, representing our rural communities. There's that advocacy piece to the provincial and federal government with that strong voice. There's that staff support as well. So with those subject matter expert teams, we call those our R&D tables, rob and duplicate. So they're sharing information to the Warrants Caucus to go up to the advocacy, but they're also sharing around that table together. And last but not least, we also have tools that we've been developing along the way. So we have our Connect On tool, which is a great mapping tool that shows where all the agricultural and manufacturing assets are in the region. So it's really great for sector development work. And then right now we're working with the Rural Ontario Institute on our rural housing information system. So that's going to give us a lot of information on the housing in the region. And that's something we're really excited to see come for this fall. Next slide. So that is a little overview of what we do at the Western Ontario Warrants Caucus and our strategic priorities for the year. And if you have any questions, we're pleased to answer them. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out to as questions arise throughout your terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions for Kate when we have her here? Councillor McKenzie.
I have a question, but I just got to put a plug in. I know you mentioned about SWIFT. And while I don't think Perth County expects to have fiber in the ground all over Perth County, we have a large number of areas that certainly are underserviced. And you know, whether we can get more fiber or whether we get more towers that we can work off of, but it certainly is an issue in some of the rural areas in our county. And I've told you that before.
I'm sure they've heard it from a lot of people. Any other questions? Councillor Orr.
Through the board, through Councillor Aitchison. Have you made a stance on or provided comments on Bill 97 at all?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. We are in the midst of developing that response right now. So we're taking all of the county's reports and work. So each county, each member's response, resolution, decision of council is what we're going to be taking as part of our submission to the environmental registry, which is due June 5th.
Thank you.
Councillor Trinkowski.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I guess my questions, you've identified listed the three topics identified by the wardens. I guess I'm on a bit of a development kick today, so please forgive me, but I'm thinking about things like the high-speed rail that was talked about a few years ago. So in the same vein, like the Highway 7 expansion has been talked about. I think they're starting to do it. And the other thing is electrification, like more wind turbines and these battery storage facilities that are being proliferating through the area. So I just wondering wanted to get a sense of what the Western wardens might be thinking about. If there's been any talks or discussion about that, or is it on your radar? What's the status?
Yeah. Through you, Chair, to the councillor. The high-speed rail discussions, I want to say that was about 2017, 2018, and Oxford County was leading the charge at that time with those discussions. And the Lawrence Caucus was front and center along with Oxford County at those discussions, particularly when the province had a specific task force looking at the high-speed rail. So we really took Oxford's lead on that work that they were doing along the high-speed rail. And more looking at not a new high-speed rail, but looking at higher frequency and using the existing rail at higher frequency and allowing passenger traffic priority versus freight or the options there. So appreciating that transportation is so critical to the movement of people and goods. Transportation remains a key priority, one of the 4 strategic priorities of the Economic Development Committee. When it comes to the wind turbines, I believe you mentioned wind turbines, correct? Was it?
Well, electrification, but you can subdivide it into turbines. And the new thing now is battery storage facilities.
Right. So that isn't necessarily on our radar right now. However, we will be looking at strategic plan next year. Right now, many of our economic development departments, as well as our councils, are developing their strategic plans. So our philosophy is have every member develop their strategic plan where the common threads are, and that will help inform our strategic plan at the regional level. So if those are important issues for Perth, if they are on the radar, and I know Perth County's economic development is doing their strategic plan. If that is something that's included in Perth County's economic development strategic plan, then that will come up to the regional level, and that's something that we will.
Thank you. Okay, other questions for Kate? See any hands? Well, thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
And I have a motion here. The council receives the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus presentation for information. Moved by Councilor Duncan, Councilor McDermott seconds. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And before we start staff reports, we're going to take a 5 to 7 minute break and let everybody stretch. If that's okay.
Good to go.
Okay. Planning services. Sally, she's already standing waiting to go. First, we're gonna discuss the software. Land use tracking. Development applications. Morning, Sally.
Morning, guys. Thanks for having me again. Today we're going to talk about a software program called Cloud Permit. And the purpose of the discussion, the purpose of the software is to implement a sort of a more sophisticated data and action tracking system for planning files. And this was a key process improvement that we identified collectively with the county and with our lower tier partners when we were redesigning the planning service model. So this is coming to fruition now. So what this program offers, and I've outlined this in the report for you, but just to give a summary, it provides login access for staff at both tiers. So if folks are engaged or involved in a planning application like clerks, planners, GIS, planning assistants, then they would have a login and it would give them access to all the parts of any planning application that they are involved with, and it would give them the ability to see the status of those applications. For planners in particular, and some clerks and planning assistants, it also provides a workflow system. So those staff members get, they can sort of see a dashboard of all the things that they are assigned to, and it also gives them reminders about tasks that are coming due. It auto generates standardized items that are very repetitive tasks, things like notices. The information for any particular file is loaded in when the file is submitted, or even at pre-consultation stage, actually. And then that sort of metadata, if you will, about that file is used to generate the notices automatically. The real benefit, and I think where the true sophistication comes in, is the ability to query and analyze our data to create a true database of all our applications. And we can use that for that search and analysis ability now for reporting. So reporting on file status is sort of the low hanging fruit. The ability to provide council with regular updates on where files are at, how many files are in the queue, how those files relate to statutory requirements and such. But also, I think what's really exciting is the ability to track our approvals from the perspective of consumption of land. So this is a direct application that we want to implement, we being all of us here, in order to really have a handle on how our growth is managed and how we prepare ourselves for continued growth and how we know where we're at regular intervals. So it's really bringing those tools to the table for staff and for council. It also provides a login access for the applicants, so they can submit their applications there, they can make their payments there, they can manage and track all the files that they're involved with at any point in time. So for someone like Carolyn Baker, for instance, she could log in and look at all the applications that she has submitted and their current status and track them that way. It's specifically been designed, Cloud Permit, for the Ontario planning regime. So it is very tailored to the Planning Act from Ontario and all of the typical processes that go on with planning applications. It's very refined to each of the different types of applications. And there are still within that abilities to tweak. So we don't necessarily do everything exactly the same as Oxford County or Huron County. So we can tweak within that system sort of exactly how our processes work and marry that with our manual that we produced last year. So it's quite a unique software opportunity or software package. And it is linked to Cloud Permit, although as a building permit module. And 3 of the 4 lower tiers are using that here in Perth County. And you can link those databases so that you can have sort of a property-based information source rather than just planning application-based database. And it's really unmatched because of these things by any other software that's available right now. So it has, for that reason, been endorsed by AMO. And I would say that we in taking on this as our software package, Perth County would not be like first in necessarily, but an early adopter, I would say, of something that has been proven to be very efficient and effective in other municipalities. And that's why AMO has really identified it as the way to go. So IT and planning staff have received demonstrations and done consulting, had consultation with the Cloud Permit vendor. And some of the specific things that are attractive besides the things that I've already offered to you today is that it's cloud-based. So it's not providing extra strain on our storage and data management systems here at the county. And also the help desk function, if you will, is through Cloud Permit as well. So it's not putting additional pressure on IT staff here to learn all the nuances of the system, to provide us with, timely and speedy support when we need it. All that is provided through Cloud Permit and included in the annual fee. So this software really can elevate, I think, our organization's ability to manage data. But I also think it has significant benefits on the side of reducing labor with respect to repetitive tasks and simply compiling that data. We use a series of spreadsheets right now, and it's quite a manual operation to query and sort and bring that data out of those tables and into a reporting format for you. So the cost is probably also of particular interest, and it's roughly $45,000 annually for the county. And that we propose to fund largely through the cost recovery process on planning application fees. So that fees review is currently underway. We set that up in 2020. And we agreed that we needed to review it on us not too long after that. So that's what we're doing right now. We're getting set up to sort of tweak and refine those fees and add some fees for things that we haven't been charging for. And just rough math on something like this at $45,000 and roughly 200 applications a year, that's about $225 on any individual application on an average. And for the 2023 year, we're already in May and we're looking at a potential implementation starting in the third quarter. That is about half that cost for 2023. So in the neighborhood of $23,000. And what we are proposing in order to get this up and running and our ability to track that data fully formed is to use the Land Division Reserve Fund. Has just over 30,000. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sally. Questions, Sally? Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. Having used the cloud permit software through 2 applications at the lower tier, I think it's extremely good software. It's very nice and easy to work with. And the nice thing is you can go back and you can refer to it at any time. All the documentation's in there. Every time I had an inspection done, within 15 minutes of the inspector being there, his inspection was uploaded to the cloud permit software. You know, I think if it works half as good for the planning applications as it's worked for our building department, this is going to be a boon to the workload here for staff at the county. So I'm fully in support of this.
Other comments?
Through the warden, this is a commitment that staff had made a few years ago when we were bringing the planning back up to the county level. And to build on those comments, it's about efficiency, it's about customer service, internal, external. It's about looking at our data, making sure it's correct and properly analyzed. It's great for business continuity when staff changes happen. And we can still see where the applications are at. The automation is a piece that we have in our strategic plan, both current and refresh, that supports this. So it's very, very welcomed and a good achievement. And it's good for our organization, it's good for our clients, and it's good for the local municipalities. Very happy with it.
Okay.
Yes, I agree. It needs to be done.
I have a motion here. The council receives a software development application for land use tracking report. Council approves the use of a portion of Land Division Reserve to fund the initiation of cloud permit for file tracking and data management of development applications for the county. Heard Councillor Kassenberg, second to Councillor Orr. Those in favor? Thank you. Moving on.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Bell Sands Farm OPA 199, and Susanna's doing that, I believe. Morning, Susanna.
Good morning.
Yeah,
Shall I proceed? Okay, so this is, council will be familiar with this application. It's OPA 199 for Bell Sands Farm. The property is in the northeast hope of the township of Perth East. And it is an application for an aggregate operation. We had the public meeting on March 7th. The public meeting for OPA 199 was at County Council on March 7th. And the applicant was here represented by Caitlin Port at MHBC Planning. There were no comments from the public at that time. If we go to the next slide, this is the location of the property. It's about 2.5 kilometers north and west of Shakespeare. And the site itself, if we go to the next slide, please. The site itself is a 72 hectare, which is 178 acre property. The expansion, the area of the expansion is 42 hectares, 105 acres, and the extraction area is 27 hectares, 67.5 acres. The planning report in your package reiterates the comments that were offered at the May 7th meeting, so I won't go through those in any detail. And the recommendation from the planning department is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Any questions? Yeah, we just did that 2 months ago.
That's right, yeah. There is, so the mapping on the screen that Sean just moved shows the designation, so changing the site to aggregate. And there is a special policy in OPA 199 to recognize the existing residents and that the residents may be removed according to the aggregate resources license.
Any questions for Susanna? I think there would be. I have a motion here. Council receives Perth County OPA number 199 Bell Sands Farms. Report for lands described as lot 25, concession 3, part lot 25, concession 4, Northeast Oak Ward in the township of Perth East. And that council approve official plan, and I repeat, approve official plan amendment number 199 to the County of Perth official plan affecting lands described as part lot 25, concession 3 and 4, Northeast Oak Ward in the township of Perth East. A mover, Councillor Duncan, second by Councillor McDermott. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Susanna. And now we're moving on to Bill 97. I believe Sally's coming back for that. Then carry on.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. All right, so I have a slide presentation for you today to run you through the changes proposed by the province for Bill 97 and the proposed changes to the provincial policy statement, which they're now referring to as the provincial planning statement. So they did revoke on April 6th the provincial policy statement. And you'll all be familiar with the PPS as being a very fundamental policy guidance piece for all of our fish plans here in Ontario. And for lower tiers and municipalities in terms of planning for infrastructure, planning for efficiency and ensuring compatibility between land uses. So on April 6th, the province released these documents. It was just hours actually after myself and Watson and Associates folks were here to give you the land needs assessment that day. And then the commenting period, as Kate mentioned earlier, ends on June the 5th. So that's a 60-day period. And I'm preparing Perth County's submission right now. And with your feedback today, I can put some final touches on that. And so the activity, I think, before all of us now is to get informed. So yesterday there was a presentation made by 3 folks through the Ontario Farmland Trust, speaking to one aspect of these updates in particular. But I did provide the link to the posting and the new PPS in your report. And it's important, I think, that not just us as staff and you as counselors, but that people generally, developers, landowners, citizens take an interest in this, because it represents quite a shift in how policy is being led in the province of Ontario. And some of these things I think we can embrace, and some of these things I think we should be pushing back against, because it changes how we have done planning for a really long time in order to create the landscape that we have, where we have protected resources, where we have growth areas, and where we have efficiencies between infrastructure and growth. And some of these things don't feel very good, quite frankly, for the Perth County context, being a largely agricultural place. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to bring you through sort of the highlights. The report has more detail, and certainly if you get into reading that posting, you'll find a higher level of detail again. But these are sort of the ones that I've picked out as highlights of things that we should be talking about and we should understand as a group. So the first one here is housing options versus affordable. So we're all becoming fairly familiar with the language around affordable housing. And the proposed PPS actually takes out that word and that definition and replaces it, in my opinion, it seems that the intent is to replace it with housing options. And housing options, by definition, is a reflection of not only the types of buildings that you might see, but also the types of ownership styles. So things like land leases or cooperative housing. And one of my points here is that ownership models are not typically how planning language and planning policy works. We don't plan for people. We don't plan for financial models. We plan for land use specifically. So it's interesting. And one of the questions that I have posed in the report and will summarize is, how do they see us as a planning authority participating in affordable housing with this different language? So there's an intention here that's not fully clear or fully maybe even formed, but it's interesting and we want to know more about it. So I also think housing options, like we had in our minds for the official plan, affordability as something we could measure and target. And I think housing options is a different way of looking at things that is potentially harder for us to measure and track. Okay, removal of the comprehensive review requirement. So, I mean, you've been listening to me talk about a comprehensive review now for about 4 years, and we've done 2 of them in that time. Well, we did one, and now we're in the midst of the update on it. And that comprehensive review is an exercise where you go about figuring out how much land do we have available for growth? How much growth do we anticipate? And then you put those together, you do the math and you figure, okay, we need this much more land to be designated and available for residential and employment uses to meet that need, to be prepared for that growth. And it's a requirement. It's always, the comprehensive review is a requirement for the expansion of a settlement boundary. And it's also a requirement within your settlement boundary to actually take any employment lands that you've already designated and convert them to residential lands. So the comprehensive review as a word, as a definition, has been removed from this proposed PPS. So what does that mean? Well, it means generally that it would be easier to expand settlement areas and to convert those employment lands into residential lands. And it doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all. It means that we can set, and there's guidance in here to set specific criteria on evaluating those expansions in a very mindful way that ensures that we have proper compatibility, proper servicing, adequate servicing, and those types of things. But what it does is it makes it so that like a comprehensive is a very involved task, and it costs a fair bit of money. So for an individual developer to make a proposal that requires this is very challenging. So what I'd like to point out about this change is that a comprehensive review and the work that we've done with Watson's here in Perth County is still an extremely valuable exercise as a municipality. Without it, how would you anticipate your growth and figure out your land needs assessment? But with removing it as a requirement for the expansion of settlement boundaries or the conversion of employment lands, it gives more flexibility to the planning authorities, the councils, to consider changes to settlement boundaries, whether that is land swaps, whether that's slight expansions or expansions for a specific purpose, outside of that requirement to do a comprehensive review. So For example, we're just doing one now. We're going to set about a growth plan in our new official plan. We're going to lay out where those properties should be to accommodate growth. And what if something happens or someone comes along that has something that we didn't contemplate that we would like to consider? Well, the removal of this requirement would mean that we wouldn't have to re-up and do that again in order to consider that proposal. It also allows us to consider expanding some of the villages and hamlets. And I think that we need to be really careful about that. So if we're going to do something like that, I think we need real clear official plan policy about when that's appropriate and when it's, and still that there's a demonstrated need for that. But it removes some of the time, energy, money involved in evaluating that when you don't have to do this each time or update it each time. So there is a flexibility there, not just for the development community, but also for you as a planning authority. And I think with flexibility comes some more responsibility, and that is making sure that the expansion of settlement boundaries is still done in a very responsible way, and that you're not detracting from the effort and infrastructure and investment in your service settlement areas by entertaining proposals for expansions elsewhere. So what the removal of this language does is it gives us this environment where we can sort of balance things a little better with some flexibility. And the onus then is to make sure that we're being incredibly responsible about this going forward. So we'll move into employment areas now. Employment areas have always been defined as your traditional industrial uses and warehousing and transportation around goods. And it's not hard to drive through our municipalities, our communities, and see that also within some of our industrial areas, we now see some commercial things that are more traditionally commercial, things that are more traditionally maybe recreational, and some institutional uses coming into those employment areas. And the new policies or the proposed policies are really asking or directing, I should say, municipalities to separate those things. So an employment area is strictly for, designated for, available for those employment uses that are defined traditionally as industrial, warehousing, and transportation of goods. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means that some of our recreational, commercial, and institutional uses that exist in those areas right now need to be specifically identified and permitted, which is different than we've done planning ever before. So one of my questions around this one is what happened to sort of legal non-conforming or legal non-complying uses? Why would we go back and retroactively re-permit these things to just because now we're more specific about our definite areas? So it's a curiosity that I have. And I think what it also means for us is that we can't continue to mix those things. So we have to be very intentional about where we're going to put commercial and institutional and recreational things.
I wanted to, Councilor Duncan wants to ask.
In the case of this situation, if we identified an existing non-employment use in those areas, say that use was to cease, would it then not be allowed to reoccur?
I think I'm following your question. So
say that business was to close.
Yeah.
And then say an industrial company moves into that property.
Right.
Would that use still be permitted?
The recreational, for example, or commercial.
Yeah, like
the intention of this is that you would not allow that to occur again. And we would want clarity from the province on that specifically, because if we're going to go and do official plan amendments to, or in our new official plan, identify these, which would be a much sort of cleaner way to go about this, then we need to have that wording reflect what that intention is. So are we going to be so specific that if that particular business ceases, it will be obvious that like any other similar business wouldn't be permitted? Or would the language be specific to say, once this business ceases, it's that type of use can no longer happen. So there's some nuance there that I think we would have to work with the province to figure out exactly how they intend for us to do this. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we're looking at our growth plan right now. I think we're being quite intentional about where we're locating employment lands for those uses going forward. And actually, we're sort of set up for this mindset already in that in our growth plan, we have considered that we do need some commercial areas as well. And those are actually currently sort of in a category with the residential needs as well. So we don't have in our growth plan those uses mixed, which is good because we were proactively setting up for this, not knowing that we would have to figure this out. So yeah, it's a different approach than what we're used to. I don't know that it will be too hard to shift, but there's going to be some homework in figuring out some of those nuances. Slide, please. Okay. These next three are just a continuation of the highlights that I want to provide to you. So regional market area, that's something that I've been talking about as well. So in our growth plan in particular, a regional market area right now is essentially interpreted by the province as Perth County, full stop. So we're not able to adjust our growth in an individual place like Listowel being a high growth place. If there is surpluses in another part of the county, we have to balance that. So our land needs assessment says we need X number of hectares and we've got a bunch over here, but this place needs much more than that. We actually have to balance that. So this place A gets less because place B already has a bunch. If that makes sense. It will make probably more sense when we start talking about our growth plan. But what the new PPS offers is that you could make a case that based on certain social and economic factors, that there is a regional market area perhaps within the county that is separate from the rest. So it's an opportunity really that we could make those arguments and therefore, you know, in our current example, treat maybe Listowel differently if we could make that case that socially, economically, it is in a different regional market area than the remainder of the county. So that's an example. I don't want us to get like too lost in that specific example, but it illustrates this opportunity to really address the needs identified for a specific area without having to account for surpluses in other places. Okay, the next one here is a specified action to coordinate growth with planning and school accommodations. So this has never been outlined in this, like with this fine a point before. They are specifically asking planning authorities to coordinate that our growth plans with school accommodation. And I think that's a pretty welcome change. Oftentimes the school boards are doing that retroactively instead of proactively. And we try to do planning for growth in the planning world proactively. So if we can use the same data and work together more closely, not that we couldn't before, but now we have this is offering a pretty specific mandate to do that. Then perhaps what they're intending here is that the accommodation review of schools is more timely. It's more aligned with growth planning for population expansions or projected populations, I should say. And it's certainly an opportunity to be far more coordinated with the school boards and how we look at growth plans, official plan amendments, and subdivisions in particular. So the last one on our chart here is a language change. So in Bill 23 and in previous iterations, we looked at an urban parcel of land. And what the intention there was if certain policies applied to an urban parcel of land, that essentially meant a service, something with public water and sanitary and storm. And so when we look at additional residential units, for example, those that bump up to three total units, 2 additional residential units being permitted on any given lot, any given residential lot, I should say. It applied to urban parcel land. And the proposed changes here actually remove the word urban. So now it's parcel of land. So they don't come out and say, now you can have 3 additional residents or 3 total units, 2 additional and 1 primary on any residential lot. But that's the effect of removing the word urban. So now we would look at the ability to put that second additional dwelling unit in places like villages, hamlets, and farms. So that will require some updates to our bylaws. And it's important to note that when you increase density like this, it doesn't relieve anybody from building code requirements, from having adequate servicing for all these things, and for being able to meet your zone provisions. So there are going to be some limitations depending on the lot, depending on the hydrogeological conditions of a place, as to whether a second or third unit on a lot is appropriate. And those of us who work in development on a day-to-day basis are going to have to ensure that those checks and balances are being made when additional residential units are proposed. Next. Okay, the last 2 in this chart of highlights. The minister's powers, and this is related to MZO, or what we are familiar with, I guess, as MZO powers, minister zoning orders, is that those powers of the ministers have certain enhancements built into this Bill 97. And it seems to be in the language that they could make decisions regardless of policy. And it sort of implies provincial policy. So it seems to me that what the language in Bill 97 is offering is that the minister could make a decision to order zoning on a specific property that doesn't even necessarily drive their proposed new planning policy statement. And it also gives the minister powers to delegate the authority to impose agreements and costs on this facilitator that's been identified. And apparently not something I was familiar with before, but that this facilitation role sort of on behalf of the minister was already put in place. And it looks like through this language, there's an intention to use that in minister zoning order activities. So my interpretation of this and in discussions with other folks is that this essentially is a removal of local decision-making power to some degree. And it's unclear what the target for these changes are. Like, is there something specific they have in mind? Or is this just generally where they would like to go with the minister's zoning order powers? And there are less requirements for the minister or the facilitator in these instances to be transparent or to publish information about the decisions that they're making. And certainly a lack of public input. So how this gets put into practice, I'm not exactly sure. I think generally speaking, we should be asking for more information about what is the intention with this policy change. And last, but certainly not least, is something that we probably all find near and dear, I know I do, is lot creation on farms. So since 1970 in Ontario, we have been very clearly trying to prevent the fragmentation of farmland for the purpose of producing food and for the purpose of farmers being able to farm. And more specifically in those areas of the province that are defined as prime agricultural lands, so the highest capability of soils, in which Perth County is almost essentially all prime ag lands. So this is a real radical shift in over 50 years of planning policy in Ontario. It also, in the language, says that, so the basics are that it would permit the creation of 3 lots from a farm parcel. There are set criteria there in here, and one of them that stands out is that those parcels, those proposed parcels would have to meet the MDS requirements for existing livestock operations, so that's quite important. And then the other one that really stands out is following the set of criteria in the document, there is this new clause that says municipalities cannot be more strict than this. So I think what we're all used to traditionally is that if you wanted to prevent surplus farm dwelling severances, for example, in your municipality, that locally you had that decision-making power, that that's something that you could control. If it was of importance and value to your community, you could make that choice. And that clause that's provided in this new PPS removes that ability. So it says, as a planning authority, you cannot restrict this 3 lot policy. And you can't be more restrictive than the criteria that it sets out. Yes.
Just, kind of along that same line, Sally. So let's suppose we end up with, 2 additional houses on a 100-acre farm. 20 years down the road, 15 years down the road, can they be severed? And how do you stop? Like you've got, we
You
talked.
mean the additional residential?
Yeah.
Well, there is an intention not to permit the severance of additional residential units. But let's envision this for a minute. If farms, like take your mind to sort of your typical farm block in your own municipality. And on that block, there's 10 lots, 10 farm lots, roughly. And then there's maybe in Perth County, there's maybe 3 or 4 livestock operations on 3 or 4 of those lots. So right now there would be 7 or 6 remaining lots that would have a chance of meeting that MDS requirement and be able to sever 3 lots off of them. So we're talking about 6 lots, each having 3 additional residential lots off of them. So 6 times 3 is 18. And each one of those lots could have up to 2 additional residential units. So all of a sudden, you're talking about 20, 30 extra houses, extra dwellings on that farm block of 10 farm lots. And the impact on those existing livestock facilities is potentially their ability to expand is protected by that MDS. But what it does, and I'm going to show you a graphic later, is it effectively sterilizes the rest of that farm block from having any new livestock agriculture. And let's just think for a minute, that's just livestock agriculture. But what if you're out there creating dust or applying pesticides or any other millions of things we do on our farms that those new 20 or 30 families don't appreciate? What kind of a headache would that be for you as a farm operator?
So just, excuse me, the point you just brought up there, Sally, also is very concerning because I see it says in the report that they're treating them like a surplus farm severance where they want them to be kept to a minimum size.
Yes.
But if you start putting 20 people on a lot, all of a sudden you have you need a septic system that's exceptionally larger than it ever would have been in the past for one farmhouse. And all of a sudden now that minimal size farm lot is now 5 to 7 acres for each one of them.
Well, I see your point, and I would like to add to it because you're talking about 3 lots with potentially 3 dwelling units on each one. So you're right, that's a fairly large septic system to service those 3 dwelling units. But, and this is something that I've been trying to sort of teach and bring into the Perth County planning context is you can't ignore the fact that you're putting septic systems beside someone else's well. So if you're looking at a surplus farm dwelling severance, you're taking one well and one septic system and you're isolating it. But if you put 3 of those in a row, and the requirements are that they're all along the road and that they're sort of clustered together. So now you've got 3 new wells and 3 new septic systems. And the lot size, if we're doing this correctly, should be evaluated through those hydrogeological assessments to make sure that those septic systems are on a large enough lot that the nitrate effluent at the lot line is not potentially affecting that neighbor's well. So if you're going to put 3 of these side by side, those lot sizes could be larger in certain soil conditions or certain groundwater conditions than what we're used to seeing is for a surplus dwelling.
Councilor Casper.
So maybe there's a small nuance here, and I just want to test my assumption. But given that there's these MDS requirements, the implication is that current animal livestock operators would be essentially frozen out from this expansion of 3 lots on their farm. And to me, and maybe I'm just being really simple thinking about it, it's almost prejudicial, right? Like you're saying, okay, those who are grain farmers and so forth win the lottery and can start cleaving off these lots and make the money from that. But those who are beef or chicken farmers, so sorry, you're not going to win.
And your beloved dairy.
I can't forget the dairy people. I'm probably the biggest milk drinker around this table. That's okay. We'll have a discussion after Councilor Aitchison, yes. But like, am I reading that right? Does that seem like a reasonable conclusion, even though it's a nuance in all of this?
MDS calculations are designed so that if you're proposing a dwelling or a sensitive land use and there's an existing livestock operation, there's a factor in that calculation that accommodates a future expansion of that farm. So the MDS calculation, in theory, provides some expansion opportunities for those existing livestock operations. And to the tune of sort of doubling, but not much more than that. And what this has the potential to do is create a wave of not only consent applications that probably were not prepared for that kind of magnitude in our current setup, but also a wave of minor variance applications to vary or provide relief from MDS. So I think, it's an incredibly slippery slope. So let's look at this a little deeper. So like I said, this is a pretty radical shift from protecting prime ag lands in Ontario with over 50 years of history of like building this protection. In that clause, it doesn't allow you to be more restrictive. It's a removal of local decision-making power and really does not allow you to control this if it goes through. As I mentioned, there's a real potential here for increased consent applications and also those likely to follow minor variance applications. It means that some of those smaller, those undersized parcels that we could refer to them now, lots that we have in our countryside are likely going to want to sever. And then those 5, 10, 8 hectare parcels will largely become residential instead of reserved for any type of small or more intensive agriculture operation, like a horticulture operation or market garden. The lot sizes for those severed properties, as we've discussed through your questions here today, are potentially going to be larger than what we're used to seeing in severed lots. And I've just done a little bit of the math here. So on an individual farm, with the original farmhouse plus its additional residential units, and then the 3 lots that you sever off of that and the potential for residential units there, that's 12 households on a farm where today there's 1 or potentially 3. So when we put this into practice, what are some of the long-term potential outcomes? And I've listed them for you here. And we've talked about some of them, but I think we'll go through this list. So we're talking about thousands of lots, and I'm going to show you some of the math on the next slide. We're talking about thousands of lots outside of settlement areas. So for those of you who are with me in this official plan, and we're trying to really target those service settlement areas for growth because it's an efficient way to use land and it prevents sprawl. This is like opposite of that, and it will, to some degree, depending on how farmers take up this potential or this opportunity, it will detract from the work that we're trying to do in those serviced areas. So the more housing you have out of the towns, the less demand there is in the towns. And we might say, okay, well, that's maybe good, but this is thousands of lots potentially. And I'm not saying that that's in a 5-year period. I'm saying it's important for us to really think longer term about this, because once this floodgate opens, how will we slow it down or stop it in future? So it's not just important that we talk about the next 5 years. It's important that we talk about the next 25, 30, 50 years of this lot creation policy. Because as this happens, we are talking about thousands and thousands of lots. And in concert with that is thousands and thousands of hectares. So if these lot sizes get into the neighborhood of 1.5 hectares, depending on those like local circumstances or factors on any particular landscape, then we're talking about the corresponding number of hectares. So thousands and thousands of hectares of prime ag land lost in our community. Not only are we talking about those lost hectares for food production, but we're talking about a far greater impact on the retained farmland. So we've discussed some of them here today, the inability to put new livestock operations, but also just the incompatibilities between folks that move to the country to live in these homes that are not accustomed to the things that go on our farms that they may not appreciate, like dust, odor, noise, flies, noise. Okay, it's extremely limiting for future livestock operations. And it's extreme pressure on you and as a planning authority and staff from the perspective of a volume of applications potentially. But let's not forget about our aggregate potential that could be impacted by these. So, and also the impacts on groundwater of all of these new wells and septic systems. But what happens to farmland values when there's less of it? And how's that going to be for farmers in 25 years from now? We all know what's happened in the last 5 years for farm prices. So I don't know that that's really, certainly selling off residential lots off your farm is a financial boon to the current owner, but that's a one-time shot. And the potential impact on farmland prices is potentially very damaging for farmers going forward. And like the whole point of preserving farmland is food production. So eventually this will have impacts on our ability to produce food locally and eventually food policy and trade policy, in my opinion. Okay. So we're gonna dig into this a little bit more, and I want to give credit to these folks, Pam Dusling, Wayne Caldwell, and Margaret Moulton. They offered a webinar yesterday over the lunch hour, and you can actually view this webinar at this website. And you can also find on the Ontario Farmland Trust, who put this presentation on yesterday, you can also find on their website some tools for action. So in addition to our submission as a county, they have got draft submissions there for individuals, for organizations. And a link to the ER posting there. So they're trying to facilitate people having a voice to this issue. And this is the presentation portion of this was about 40 minutes. It's certainly interesting and worth watching. And then there was a question period at the end. So the next 2 or 3 slides, or maybe 4, I have actually taken from their presentation yesterday. So this is an image from a planning policy document in 1976, but the concept that it illustrates is really important. So looking at farmland, which is the dark shaded areas, and the impact and the number of hectares affected when you cluster housing versus when you spread it out. So you can see what happens when you cluster it, but the majority of that farm block is still available for locating livestock operations and for ensuring that they don't have to be set so far back into the lots. But once you start spreading those sensitive land uses, those houses out along the roadways and on every frontage of every existing lot, then you push those livestock operations into the middle and you reduce the total hectares significantly. So I just wanted to start with that concept. So this is just a schematic to show, like, just to give you a sense of like what the block would look like. And yeah, this is assuming that every lot on this block could have meets MDS essentially. So maybe this is a little over dramatic, but it's essentially showing you the number of lots on a typical farm block. And then if you just click again, Sean. So looking at the two concepts or the two images that we've just seen and thinking about how municipalities have sort of regulated severances over time and the impacts that that has. So this is an example of what the outcome is on a typical block in Prince Edward County versus a block in Perth County. And now this data is prior to us doing surplus farm dwelling severances, but you can see that the number of severances was really limited. It was less than 1 per 1,000 acres. And now certainly our number is higher than that, but nowhere near 8 severances per 1,000, which is based on an MDS calculation of 552, which is your typical 2,000 head finishing barn. So this just illustrates again what we're talking about, the impact on agriculture. And one more time, Sean?
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
That slide you just showed there. So we're showing 0.8 severances per 1,000 per county.
Yeah, prior to doing surplus dwelling severances. Yeah.
So I guess my comment's going to be, and I'm not pointing fingers, but perhaps if we had started doing surplus farmhouse severances a little sooner, we wouldn't have had all the houses torn down. Because I can drive up and down a lot of blocks and there's not a house on it, but they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in this room could point out all the concessions. The problem now is farming has got so intensified. And you keep talking about, starting new livestock operations. What I see is the number of producers shrinking. Because now, yes, there's 100 cow operations, but if you see a dairy operation now, they're 300, 400, 500,000. I know 2 guys that milk 10,000 cows. Like, you're not going to get the amount of agricultural startups as far as livestock that you think you're going to get. I don't think. Because when I started milking cows in '84, there was 13,000 dairy producers. I think you have less than 3,000 now.
It's just over 3,000 in Ontario.
That's to prove my point.
Like 31.
Our producers, I imagine, have gone the exact same way. All the ones that have the smaller fairly finished, they're gone. Like, they are gone. They're not coming back. But again, and I know Councilor Ward, I've talked about this. We see down the road that 20 farmers are going to own half your township or more. In all honesty, like they are. Like, you just look at the trend right now, and we see it more towards the south than you will the north, but the north is seeing it now. So, and I know you really don't want these people putting houses out in the countryside, but I just talked to a grain farmer, grain, beans, corn. He has no intention of having livestock in his life. He can't find enough help to work for him this spring to plant crops. And one of the reasons is he has nowhere to put that person. He said, and he said, it's partly my own fault. I knocked down 3 houses.
And didn't put up an additional residential unit.
Well, he took down 3 surplus farmhouses he didn't want to pay the taxes on. And he didn't want to be a landlord. Now, if those were there on those properties, he could. Most people would rather have ownership versus renting. He could, he could sell them at home, sever it off, and everybody would be happy. And he'd have a far more happier employee and somebody that's maybe more willing to stick around. But I just somewhat disagree with some of the numbers here.
Okay, so this is some research that Dr. Caldwell had done after 2010. And this research is being updated right now. So we've had some of his research associates into quantify the severance activity here in Perth County over the last 5-6 years. So this is sort of a visual of how those severances impact agriculture. And then when you add the MDS circles for the types of, or the number of housing units that are potentially possible, it begins to look like this. So this is maybe a dramatic schematic, but it's not unrealistic necessarily over the long term. So over those 15, 20, 25, 30 years of allowing those severances on every farm. Especially over time as livestock operations cease or don't expand. And certainly when we don't, when, maybe a portion of these lots occur, but that reduces the ability to set up any new livestock operations. So then over time, the ability to put more lots is greater as well. So this is what they offered in the presentation yesterday about like where this policy takes us. So looking a little bit closer to Perth County, our GIS folks helped me figure out how many parcels we have in each sort of size category. And then this is some, pretty rough math. I'm not including any MDS factor here. So that's an important caveat. But if you look at something that's less than 2 hectares, maybe they could have 1 lot, but maybe not. It depends on some of those factors we talked about. But in the 2 to 5 hectare range, there's potential there for 2 lots, 2 in additional. And then in some of the upper, the categories with a larger land base than those individual farm lots today could end up with those 3 additional lots. So how many lots is that in total? Well, over time, the potential here is about 18,000 lots in Perth County. And 18,000 hectares, if each one of these was a hectare, and I granted this is pretty, basic, rough calculations, but that's 9% of our current farmland. So this is the sort of type of calculation that all the counties are doing. This is the type of calculation that the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus is looking to bring forward. And so this is our numbers that go into that. Next up. So some facts about agriculture in Ontario to put this into context. Of the total Ontario land base, prime agricultural lands count for 5%. And we know that Perth County is a large part of that. And we're looking at reducing our portion of that by 9%. Ontario agriculture contributes 750,000 jobs in Ontario. That's 1 in 10 employed, and $47 billion to the province's annual GDP. So in the last 20 years, with just growth and development, we've looked at a decrease of farmland of 20%, and that's all farmland, not just prime. And just a reminder that once lands are developed, once farmlands are developed, it's sort of done. It's a done deal. It's lost forever. So that is a little bit of context for what we just considered, those concepts and the impact of this policy. This is a place for it to land in our mindset. And next. So this is a summary of the things that we've been talking about. removing the ability in Perth County to set our own standards as a planning authority for lot creation in these prime ag lands. It's being taken. It undermines 50 years of prime land protection efforts. And in Perth County, that's a big deal. This county worked really hard at coming to an agreement on surplus farm dwelling standards. And there was a reason for that, because prime ag lands are valuable. They're a finite resource. It distracts from the resources and investments and planning that we are trying to lay out for some of the intensification, density, and redevelopment opportunities that we want to see happen in our service settlement areas. And even with some more flexibility around villages and hamlets, like expanding a villages and a hamlet is far more attractive than lot creation on farms. Than taking those country blocks and dividing them up that way and applying all those MDS circles. So like that's a happy medium, if you will, would be so like to allow villages and hamlets to expand rather than this. And it doesn't really acknowledge the planning that we have done or that every other municipality has done to accommodate growth. And Kate touched on a little bit in her presentation, which was we projected how many houses we were going to have. And we're planning for that. We're going to accommodate those. We did that because the province asked us to. They directed that in the PPS. So that's why we did it. It's an important tool. It's an important exercise. But when they set about how they were going to achieve 1.5 million homes, they didn't ask us what that number was. So why then would they jump to severances on farms as the solution? The policy as proposed ignores some of the short and long-term impacts on agricultural operations, food production in our community and for our province, providing community services. So as a municipality, that's a far greater number of households to collect garbage from. That's a lot more kids to get bused to school. Those are two areas where we already know it's challenging at best. And also doesn't really consider the impact on aggregates and groundwater long-term. So it seems like there's a bunch of pieces missing from the homework that you would expect to create a policy like this. Next slide. Okay, I want to summarize with the comments that I have proposed in this report that we submit as a county to the ministry. I think there are just 6 of them. So that those additional MZO powers be removed. At the very least, they be explained far better than they have been. Next up is to support that change that allows 2 additional residential units on a lot. Because we can do that responsibly through our zoning, building code, and adequate servicing policies. To provide clarity on how they envision municipalities, upper and lower tiers in what is our roles and responsibilities with respect to affordable housing with that language change. Some clarity is really needed around that. Number 4 is they haven't provided any insights as to what they intend to do with the natural heritage policies. And locally, we have a lot of irons in the fire on this one. So I think we would like to know sooner than later, what is their intention? And can we get commenting on that? Because we're putting a lot of energy and resources into this one, and it's a critical piece of our new official plan. That generally, I think our county could support flexibility for the expansion of settlement areas and villages and hamlets included, that removal of the comprehensive review requirement to allow for that flexibility for planning authorities. But also acknowledging that that's a far better proposal than lot creation on farms. And I think this is the last one that we request that they remove the lot creation policies from the agricultural resource section. So I think my final slide is next, and it is in setting up, I guess, your discussion or your direction for us on how you would like these comments to be submitted. I've put up a couple ideas here that have sort of been milling about in my brain at least, and that is that I use what I'm offering you today, plus the feedback you give me to finalize that letter. And that perhaps it would be more poignant if it was signed by not only planning staff, but a representative of council. And maybe with a signature from council that we add maybe a sentence or two about the resolution of council, or that this is, your wish as well as what you've been advised by your planning staff. And then I'm curious about an interest in other directions that you might see Perth County taking, and that maybe involves, and this is kind of coming from the presentation yesterday, like, is there a desire to talk to our MPP, and who would do that here for Perth County? And is our voice being heard? Yes, it's being heard through the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus. Yes, it's being heard through the rural planning directors. And yes, it's being heard through our letter to this posting. But is there other efforts that you want to take? And an encouragement for individual folks, council staff, citizens, for that their voice to be heard as well. And whether or not as a county we want to encourage that through a website posting, or whether that's something you're interested in or not. So these are just suggestions for conversation. And I'm happy to take questions and certainly receive your feedback on how you'd like to direct staff to submit these comments to the ministry. And the deadline for that is June 5th.
Councillor Kassenberg.
Could we just go back to just past the slide, this one here? I'd just like to make two comments. To the first one, MZO, that's really just comes when it's an extreme or change, right?
That's been our experience, but that doesn't mean it will always be that way.
Okay. And then I really do appreciate all the effort you put in for the lot creation permissions on farms. I again struggle with myself for the fact that I live in Perth County, but I am on a rehabilitated gravel pit. I have a significant amount of land that I could potentially put some lots on. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I got farmers that need people to work on their farms. I really truly believe that there's people like myself who grew up on farms and want to live in the country, and not necessarily going to argue about the smell or and everything like that. Like there's a demographic that is looking to live in the country. I think there's value to having some lot creations as long as they are not taking out prime agricultural land. And I feel like we go back to one of the comments in there was that, there's classifications of land. And it's almost like it's too much of a blanket for all the time is like, I'm a gravel pit. It's hard. I can't farm on my land, but happy to be there. One other thing is that these houses would bring financial tax income. And going back to that would be helpful for the overall scope of Perth County. Because it's taxed different on a residential land than it is on a farmland. And then my final point, sorry, I have a lot of points. Sorry, I'll have to come back to it. I can't think of it right now.
Councillor Kassenberg.
Thank you, Chair. I think, two things that jump out at me, plus you asked a little bit about a process recommendation moving forward. So first, I think from what you shared, and you've covered it to some degree in bullet 3, but it does seem like there's been a dilution in this proposed planning statement of intent around affordability of housing. The fact that they seem to have removed that word in the context of this new planning statement and talk about housing options, and you sort of went through the implications of that, I find disturbing, especially given our circumstances all across Ontario. It's not just a Perth County problem. We have affordability problems everywhere in Canada, and if the government cannot see that and wishes to sort of dilute its intent, that is a significant error in public policy. So I think, in fact, item 3 may not be strong enough. We may need to be more assertive about saying that there should be no dilution of intent around a commitment to affordability of housing in the province of Ontario. And that this planning statement may have done that, whether, intentionally or inadvertently. That needs to be a question. Item 2, I think it relates to bullet point 2. And I have a concern as a mayor of a community, and I think all of us are sort of wondering about this. It precedes this current legislation, Bill 97, was embedded more in Bill 23. But how do we plan for services? In urban serviced areas, all of a sudden there's this sort of broad permission to allow for 2 additional residential units. And on the surface of things, that looks fine. But how do we pay for the upgrades in services that are going to be required to accommodate the additional volumes of things like sewage and water and so forth? And you know what? We're already facing an infrastructure deficit that at least in North Perth, we have this asset management plan, and we're putting aside trickles of money for the next 40 years to try to close our infrastructure gap. And now we're being asked to deal with potentially a new infrastructure gap that we can't even wrap our hands around. It's so amorphous at this point that how do we even begin to plan for it? And with the changes, from what I understand, to development charges associated with this, how do we pay for it? And so it comes back to words that were pointed out by Kate Burns Gallagher earlier. This whole notion of we're going to make municipalities whole. What does that even mean? What does that mean in the context of our work as elected officials in the municipal sphere? Make municipalities whole? Does that mean they're going to amalgamate all of us into one big city of Ontario and that's how this will work? What does it mean? So I think with regards to item 2, there needs to be some caveats in there that sure, we're supportive of notions of increasing density in urban areas, but we're supportive of that in the context of being supported as well from the provincial purse related to the provision of services and the upgrading of services and infrastructure that will be required in that context. And you can tell I'm angry about this particular matter. So with regards to process, I think all of us need to dance naked in the streets to make the point and draw the attention to this issue that there is a serious concern here. Some of us might not be all but it will get attention. Councillor McDermott would get attention, that's for sure. Absolutely, we can avoid, I think, this council's opportunity if it's presented to speak to our MPP. No question about that. We should be doing that. And that may need to be a delegation from all of council in that room so that there's a clarity of our intent around getting some of this stuff right. But I can't help but think, and maybe it's the subversive in me, that there has to be more than this. We need people to rise up and say, this is not acceptable. I'm not going to tolerate this. And this is moving in the wrong direction in rural communities. And so, to the intensive done around item 6, bullet point 6, this is the one. This is the single bomb, if you will, in this planning statement that is going to harm our communities, our municipalities the most, in my humble opinion. And this is the one that warrants active protest in our communities beyond what we can do. And if we can contribute by dancing naked in the streets, Councillor McDermott, then that's a worthy objective. I'm game, even though I'm a modest person. So I just think something has to be done here that's vigorous and sends a very clear message that this is harmful in a number of ways, harmful to small urban and rural municipalities and extremely harmful to a food and farm vision of feeding our citizens and our communities.
Councillor Trankowski.
through you, Mr. Chair, and I guess to support Councillor Kasenberg's comments and statements and Sally's as well. When we had the forum with the MP and the MPP hosted by the OFA, a number of us were present at that meeting in March. The different commodity groups reported in on their status of their respective industries. I'll start with dairy. Dairy, pork, poultry were the three leaders, like Perth County, Perth Wellington. They were identified as the three leading agricultural producing industries in the province. Also grains, not too far behind were the beef and the egg producers and the sheep people. So we heard that information. That information was relayed to the MP and the MPP, and they acknowledged that. They didn't dispute it. We went through the scenarios of infrastructure deficit already with the current population base that we have and the struggles to keep up with it. So with this new information for the provincial planning statement, Bill 97, Bill 23, they're sucking and blowing on the straw at the same time. Same straw at the same time. So if we're going to produce food, then give us the tools and the ability to produce the food. Don't kill us by death with the death of 1,000 paper cuts. And to that point, I sit on, at West Perth, I sit on the Committee of Adjustment. We already have livestock producers that are asking for a variance on their MDS, and Sally's department can attest to that. And we have letters coming from the residents in the impact zone saying, yes, we waive our rights to appeal. This is a farming community. We agree with what the proponent is doing. We have no objections. But that's people that are, once we get new people coming in from outside of the community, as Sally has indicated, that level of cooperation and support is at risk of disappearing altogether. And we're opening up a Pandora's box of issues. And I agree with Councillor Kasenberg that we need to be very vigorous in our opposition, not only to the provincial directive, but also to the opposition to the fact that the local municipalities have lost that ability to have that extra lever to, what was it, Sally, to go above?
Yeah, it removes our ability to be more restrictive.
Yes, thank you. We need to retain that power, because in order to have local solutions, we need to have, to deal with local problems, we need local solutions. And that's the key to being able to do that, is to have that restrictive power at our discretion. Thank you.
Ally.
Just wanted to build on the point about MDS and variances, because I wanted to offer the opposite scenario where it's not the livestock producer who needs the MDS set or reduction, but it's someone who wants to build a house who's coming in for a reduction in the MDS that they need to be from the livestock operation. And in the minor variance process, the livestock operator would have an opportunity at a public meeting to oppose that reduction that's being proposed by the person wanting to build the house. But if council chose to approve that variance, then Bill 23 actually removed the farmer's rights to appeal. So there's things that happened last fall that also we still need to be talking about, because those changes plus these changes together is what we're like gonna get into.
Comments? Councilor McKenzie?
Well, I would agree with what's been said, other than dancing in the street. I'm really not too much in favor of that. But I think certainly we have to put some pressure on our MPP. And as Dean has indicated, we certainly need the support of our agriculture sectors, the dairy, the beef, the pork, and the poultry on side. And I'm not sure if if we all go to the MPP's office or we invite the MP to come here, and also extend an invitation to the chair of those commodity groups and have them all at the same time. That was a very similar presentation to what Sally did now, like a rerun of this, just to drive it home.
I can't say I don't agree with your comments, but I'm gonna say you'll never get that done before the submission's supposed to be in. Not gonna happen.
We have another meeting, don't we?
Yeah, I know, but you're not gonna get all those people involved at the same time. We've had meetings with Matthew Ray the last little while in First South, and it's difficult just to get a meeting with one group, like with us and his schedule. Yes, Sally.
So just to offer some insights into the timeline, the commenting period ends June the 5th at midnight. So we are organizing ourselves to have that to submit. And the province has implied that there is an intention to implement this in the fall. So it implies that there is a period of time between when they will be considering the comments that were received, and perhaps there's an opportunity there to still have influence. Now, having said that, Bill 23 was proposed, and before the commenting period even ended, they implemented that policy. So I don't know how comfortable we feel with the opportunities or the timelines that are available, but that's something food for thought, is that if they do intend to implement in the fall, then there is additional time to still have conversations and potentially influence.
Okay, I'm gonna make one other comment here. So this report isn't getting circulated to the lower, hasn't been circulated to the lower tiers. I'm assuming you won't be presenting that to the lower tiers before submission date.
I don't think that's physically possible.
Somewhat disappointed in that because the others 10 counselors here. But overall, you've got 40 plus 50 counselors. I honestly thought the lower tier should have a chance to address this report, make comments as well. You know, we should just rely on one level or one authority. I don't know, I could be wrong, maybe, you know, slap me upside the head if you think I'm wrong, but I honestly think the lower tier should have seen this and been able to get some comment into it. Because I'm looking at some of your numbers like farms, and you got some that are less than 2 hectares. Is that because it's zoned agriculture?
Everything,
Or is it because it's an actual farm?
everything in that list is a property that's designated agriculture, has agriculture designations. It may also have natural environment designation or aggregate designation, but it has agricultural designation. So it's outside of settlement boundaries.
There are all kinds of zoned agricultural properties in the countryside that would be ideal for a few houses because they'll never be farmed in a million years. Let's be honest, they haven't been and they won't be. Councilor Orr just referred to one that they have. Most farmers are smart enough, they are not going to put a bunch of houses on the front of their property if they know it's going to cause them harm down the road. Got to give the farmers some credit here. Like we've got the worst case scenario numbers up there. You will never see that because I don't know. I only know 3 farmers would want to put up a couple houses. That's because they need the people to work for them. You get your hand up, Councilor Duncan.
Yeah, and in reference to that comment, Jim, I think though what we're gonna end up seeing is we're gonna see more investment by investment companies in farmland to purchase them, sever those lots off and then resell that farmland. It's gonna be development pressure you're gonna face. You're not gonna see, but if you give them more opportunity, it's gonna get worse and it's gonna drive the price of farmland up worse. Last week, we've had 440 acres listed outside Atwood at $50,000 an acre. Oh, you've been a banker, you know that doesn't work.
But it quit working after about 15.
So, and my second comment is in reference to MDS. It's not just the livestock producers that have to worry about putting all these houses in the country. My personal experience is twice being a water truck driver who gets stuck on the side of the road while the sprayer guy's operating. I'm the guy that gets accosted by the new residents to the community. What are you doing? What are you spraying? Why are you doing this? This could drift onto my lawn, you know, and you put a whole bunch of those people that have that same lack of experience with this together, and all of a sudden you're going to run into problems. So I think if we want to put more houses in the country, like in Susan's case, that needs to be a decision made by the county at the local level where we know what is good spots and what's not good spots. Not by the province telling us you should just let everybody go willy-nilly. So.
Yeah, we do have some land that's not primary agriculture, trust me.
Exactly.
Do you have a comment, Councilman?
Just, certainly, I think Councillor Duncan has made a point that probably warrants injection into the commentary, right? That local councils have a greater understanding and affinity to local issues that should be addressed. But I still think, I mean, yes, I agree with you, Jim, that there's sort of a, the numbers presented, the story that can be told here is certainly worst case scenario, right? It looks catastrophic, and it's easy for me to go off on a rant about that catastrophe. But I think we have to draw a line in the sand around some of this. I don't think that there's any question that some of this is harmful to Perth County and to our citizens and residents and business owners. And that it's worth us saying, here's where the line is drawn from our perspective.
Okay, I think we've beat this through the bush long enough. This meeting's running long, so I've got a motion here. I'm going to read it. And the motion is the council receives the Bill 97 Helping Home Buyers Protecting Tenants Act 2023 and draft provincial planning statement April 6, 2023 report. The council directs staff to submit comments to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing on the proposed changes to the provincial planning statement 2023 as outlined in this report. And this report be circulated to the lower tier municipalities within Perth County for information. Councillor Kassenberg.
Before we go there, perhaps an amendment that might.
Well, I'm just reading you the motion I got on here.
Yeah. With regards to the submission, I think we should indicate one, that it should be signed by the warden on behalf of Perth County, and two, that some of the additional comments that were heard in this meeting be considered by the planning staff and injected into the comments that we submit.
And should we see that before they submit it? Because we could have that quote unquote come back for our next meeting, which would be June 2nd, which would be before June 1st, which would allow time for still submission. So how do we get that back to us the next meeting? So do you want to just defer this motion? We haven't even got a motion on the floor yet. So would you like to defer this matter until we get some of the comments made today interjected into this statement?
I think we still need to direct staff to prepare.
Well, that's what I'm saying, defer and then direct staff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the word defer necessarily in this context. We're directing staff to prepare an updated version
For the next meeting on June the 1st.
Right.
Is that your motion?
Yes, please.
Second by Dean Kontrowski. Last chance for comments. Councillor McKenzie.
I still think that because of June 1st being so far down the road, that follow up anything further is probably unrealistic. In the meantime, we also try and make appointment with the MPP, and I would say maybe warden or director of planning, somebody, with a bit of knowledge here, sits down and talks to them, because after the 1st of June or 2nd of June, whatever it is, it's going to be too late.
You know how long Parliament sit until, to be honest with you. They're back there right at the moment, but. Anyway, I got a motion on the floor. Got a seconder over here. Those in favor of that motion? That's carried. And once we get that back, I still think we have time to maybe do a one-on-one with, but you're not going to do it with a group of people. You're going to do it with either the warden and the director of planning or whoever. Found that out the last couple of weeks. Good. Okay, we're going to move on. So this meeting, 20 after 12. We've still got a lot of council to go through here. I'm gonna possibly suggest we defer the corporate services report with the exception of the web GIS system because Gary is here until the next meeting. And then we are gonna go through all the tender results, et cetera, because we have people here for that. But I would like to defer forestry, corporate services update, and then Q1 financial variance report until the next meeting. Anybody got a problem with that? Don't move that. Do I have a seconder? Gary, second, Councilor Duncan, that's carried. I take it. Those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we got Gary here. Gary, take it away. And in what time is it now? I've taken the liberty and asked Lori to order up some pizza. So I think it's 12:30 or 12:40. It's going to be 12:30. So when it shows up, we will have to break for a minute. So we don't all clap. That's going to be time to move again. Okay. Gary, take it away.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Gary White. I'm the GIS coordinator for Perth County. I'm just going to give Sean a break here and move through my own slides. Stare at my screen. Before you is a report providing an overview of and a brief introduction to the GIS services that are offered by Perth County. GIS is a tool used to manage and display a variety of data such as civic or 911 addressing, zoning designations, capital assets, and much more. Today, I'm going to provide you with a brief demonstration of the GIS platform that are available to staff and the residents of Perth County and how to use some of the more common features. So to begin with, what I've got up right now, this is the Perth County GIS webpage where you can find a variety of different maps available to you, both interactive and static. And what we're going to do is move to the interactive tile and just click on that. And what it's going to do is launch into another page, and you'll see we get the disclaimer, the splash screen disclaimer that we have to agree to before we can move on. And to start with, you get a large overview of all of Perth County. What I wanted to direct you to is just a couple of things. When you start up, you'll see that there's a number of tabs and tools across the top. Now, what do those tools mean? To save space, and you'll notice this when it first launches, and until everybody gets more familiar with this, you can just toggle this label on, and you'll see that it expands down, and it will give you more information as to what each of these tools do. And as you cycle through the different tabs, you'll see that they are it's perpetuated through each of the different tabs. Down the side, we have our layers. These have been grouped together into themes. And through them, you'll see that there are some that have been that have blue check boxes next to them. These mean that they're active. So they are automatically turned on as soon as you start launching, as soon as you launch the web GIS. What you'll also see is many of them have a plus sign down the side. That means that this grouping of layers is expandable, and you can click on it and it will show you what is grouped underneath that heading. And in this case, we're looking at community. Now, to counter, you'll see that there are some blue checks, but you can't see any community facilities or points of interest right now. That's because there is a scale limitation set. Otherwise, if this was the case, your screen would just be populated with all kinds of dots and you wouldn't see anything. As you move in or zoom into certain areas, those will become, you'll see it as regular text and you'll start seeing the information appear on the screen as well. What I'm also going to do now is kind of run through a bit of a scenario as to how do we find information within this system. So the first one is I want to look up a property, and I don't know the address of it. I just know that it's located on Napier Street. So one of the things that I can do is move over to the search and identify tab and switch my tools. There are a number of workflows that we have created at Perth County that will specifically query the data. And one of the things that I'm just going to go to is I'm going to search a road by name. So I click on that and it will change, and you'll see I have this entry box. And I'm just going to start typing. And I got as far as NAP in lowercase, and it auto-populates with some of the options that meet those criteria. I'm going to pick Napier Street and hit OK. And then what happens here is that it automatically zooms to every road segment that has Napier Street attributed to it. So we can see, so really what it is these are road segments as they're broken at intersections, but the entire yellow is Napier Street. If I wanted to move around a little bit, and here's an example of, you can see as I zoomed in, more information appeared, such as the parcels, water bodies, and some of the community points as well. If I wanted to move them around a little bit, I can just click and hold and drag the whole thing, and it will reposition itself like that. You can also go back to your navigation, and if you want to zoom in, I'll activate the tool and I can just do drag in like that, or I can zoom out, and the same idea, it will zoom out to a set scale, probably a little too far. I wanted to go back in. My mouse has a scroll bar on it. If I scroll up, it will automatically start moving in on top of where the cursor is currently placed. I know the address and I want to refine the search a little bit more now. What I'm going to do here is you'll see as well as you're doing these queries, you'll have these tabs appear. If you want to get back, you just use the back arrow. It'll show you the selection that you did and you can just close it. I accidentally closed my list on the side. All I have to do is just go to the layer list and open it up again. And that button appears on every tab, because that's probably one of the most common things that happens is you lose your table of contents or your layer list. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to find. So I know that I want to find 4 Napier Street. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a civic address search, and I'm going to start typing in 4. And there's only one address that has even just 4 NAP. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to hit OK. And this zooms me in to the area and I can see, okay, this is the property that I'm looking for. And there's a couple of features on there. I can click on that one and it tells me that it's the public works yard and it's a government facility. There's also another feature here. It's the EMS base. If I wanted to take a look at what do those mean as well? Like, what are the other features as well that I saw? I can expand on the community facilities and it will give me what each of those icons means, okay? This is great, but there's not a lot of context to this. So one of the things that we do have now is, I'm still calling it new, but it's our 2020 air photo information. We can turn that on and it will give us a bird's eye view of what is on that property right now. I'm going to turn off the community facilities so that we don't have them on there anymore. And I also just want to confirm that this is the right address. And I can turn on the, I'm going to turn on the addresses. Unfortunately, you cannot see that because the yellow dot is right there. So I'm just going to get rid of that. It is a little bit small on screen and not very great resolution, but these have all of the addresses, the civic addresses or the 911 addresses as they appear in Perth County's address data system. Lastly, we can look at a bit more information on this property. So for instance, I'm interested in knowing what is the zoning on this property. So I can go down to the planning because I know it's there, or I could just type in here if I'm looking for a specific filter or layer. I can type zoning and it will find anything in there that's already called, with zoning information. So I can click that and now I can see the different categories that are located in that zone. So in this case, the gray matches up with institutional. I can also just identify and click on this and I can see zoning and it confirms that it is institutional. It's located in West Perth and it gives me area calculation as well. The last part I'm going to show you on this, to refresh the whole thing. Back to my search for Napier. And you'll notice that as I zoomed out back to the whole county, it turned off a lot of stuff. Air photo and zoning information are very heavy data sets, and we're very mindful that not everybody has high-speed internet. So trying to just reduce the amount of data that is trying to be fed, because these are pretty data heavy layers. So we don't want people to just kind of get stuck with their computer spinning and waiting for it. So the last one I just want to show you is, now that you've found this property, what are some of the things that you can do on the property? One of the things probably that we can anticipate is just measuring things on the property. So for instance, here, I've got this measure a distance. And you'll notice that when a tool is active, there's this yellow banner across the top of the window, and it tells you what it can do. So in this case, what I'm interested in looking at is I want to measure the distance from this driveway to the Public Works building to the center of the driveway that'll get me into EMS for planning or whatever. So like a frontage. And you'll see once I click on it, it gives me, do a double click there. What it does is it gives you the measurement right across. And this is basically a graphic now that's on your map. So I can see from the distance from the center of the driveway across, it's about 60 meters. So that's one of the more basic measurements that you can do. I don't like it being in meters. I want to know what it is in feet. All you have to do is go up to here where you activated your tool and you can over to feet. So now I can see it's 195 feet. The last thing is I want to take a look at this building. Sorry, John, I'm picking on you. And I just want to know, well, actually, we could cycle through some of the things here. This is the more recent building. Because if we go back, we can take a look at what did this property look like 2000, 2006, 2015. It takes a little while, so there's nothing there now. And then in 2020, we have a new structure. So what I want to do is do a quick measurement on this building. So I switch now from a linear to a area calculation, and it's again, I know the tool is active because I have this yellow bar. And what I can do is just line up and do one single click at each corner and double click to finish it. And you'll see as I'm doing it, it gives me measurement across each side, but then in the center, it provides you with an overall area calculation plus the perimeter as well. So I've done this great SketchUp. What I want to do now is create a map from it. And I'm just going to deactivate the tool and go to print. And what this does now is this lets me create a map. You'll have to play around with it a little bit because this part can get a little finicky. But one of the biggest things is just to unlock that, and then you can drag your image to the center, and I can call it building footprint Napier Street. And there's various resolutions. I'm only going to do it to the lowest one right now, again, because this is for time and bandwidth. And then I hit print. And what happens there is it auto generates this PDF file to a certain template with some of the information that we've got on there, shows the calculation, and it has an automatic timestamp on it as well. So this concludes my demonstration of some of the tools that are available on this platform. If you would like a more in-depth demonstration or have any questions, I will be happy to set up a time. This concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Questions for Gary? That's all right.
When does it get updated?
Through the chair, that's a great question. So the various data layers get updated on a regular data cycle. So for instance, the parcel information is probably one of our most regular, and we do that 4 times a year as per our impact downloads, plus as severances occur. So we are updating those more often. Some of them get fewer, for instance, like the water bodies. We don't have to update unless there's a major change, unless there's a dam or something like that.
Any questions? See any hands? I got a motion here. Council receives the Web GIS System Introduction Report for information. Councilor Smith, Councilor McKenzie, those in favor? That's carried. So I believe lunch could be here. I smell it go by. What's that?
You just delivered it.
Yeah. We're gonna need a resolution to go past 1 o'clock. So if somebody want to make that, Councilor Casper, second by Councilor Trinkowski. I promise you we'll be out of here before 2, or we'll defer more. Those in favor? That's carried. We're gonna break briefly for lunch. Okay. And stretch. You don't need, we just. Next up, finally, Public Works. Better results, and we have our esteemed friends from Mayhew here. And John, take it away.
Thank you, Councilor Aitchison, and good afternoon, Council. In the fall of 2021, County Council directed staff to move forward with the design of a project that would see the renovation of both floors of 5 Huron Street and to house the county's administrative staff, along with a new connecting addition to service the main entrance and central reception for both the courthouse and 5 Huron facilities. This report summarizes the tender results for the construction of this project, which was open to the 8 contractors we pre-qualified back in September of 2022. With me today is Paul Bradshaw, representing Mayhew, our prime design consultant, and Brent Powers from Artis Engineering, who will be providing project management services during construction. The 3 of us are here to answer any questions council may have related to the design, tender, and construction process. The construction tender closed on May 9th, and we received 6 bid submissions, which are summarized in the table of the report. The low bid was from Dacon Construction Limited with an overall price of $5,050,900, excluding HST. Dacon Construction is headquartered in Waterloo, and the county has not previously worked with this contractor. However, Dacon has successfully completed many projects of similar size and scope. Staff would also note that we did also pre-qualify Daycon to bid on our courthouse elevator project. Back in November of 2022, council was presented with an updated Class D estimate for the project. That estimate was just over 4.8 million and had a variance of plus or minus 25%, meaning we could see construction costs in the range of 3.8 million to 6 million. Staff would note that the Class D estimate did not include any contingency or furniture costs. All 6 bids that were submitted included a $200,000 contingency allowance and a $290,000 furniture allowance. Given these allowance costs and that we've received 3 competitive bids, we can consider that the tender results and low bid reasonable, reflective of the current marketplace, and validates the Class D estimate. Staff are recommending that council approve the low bid and award the contract for the 5 Huron Reno and Connecting Link Addition project to Daycon Construction Limited. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for John on this, or Don, or Paul, or
Brent.
Brent? Hi, really? Okay. I have a motion here. I'm only gonna comment one little thing. So when we did the original pricing, this is a little higher, but this also includes more as part of the bid, right? So it's almost a wash. If I read that right? The contingency is less.
Through you, Chair. When we originally started this project, certainly the estimate at that time was not inclusive of a number of site works. We have added additional scope to this project over the course of the 16 months of the design. So I guess, that Class D estimate certainly due to market conditions, to inflation, to increased labor costs and material costs. And, I think all types of facility projects, we're seeing those similar market conditions in their pricing.
Councilor Trinkowski.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So I guess a question for yourself, John, or the designers. With respect to the schedule, are there any showstoppers in terms of supply chain issues with materials or labor supply issues that might affect the schedule or the progress of the work that you could foresee right now?
Yes, through the chair, I'll start and then maybe let Brent or Paul respond to the rest. But the Daycon Construction, I have reached out to them. Their current schedule is looking to potentially start this project late summer, perhaps some preliminary work in the summer, early summer. And that the project would take approximately 12 months being completed in early September of 2024. That being said, I mean, we've provided a long enough construction schedule to sort of accommodate that, and taking into consideration certain long lead items like an elevator, for instance.
Nothing to add?
And one more separate question. Thanks for your answer in the first question. So the second question is, how does, from a constructor's point of view, if we have the current work with the elevator at the courthouse, how does that work? Will that work be done before this contract starts to avoid the county becoming designated as the constructor?
Through the chair, We do anticipate that the elevator project will be complete prior to or just around the same time frame as this may start up. So you may see the contractor for this project come in and direct sort of site hoarding and things like that, and preparing for demolition and work. But yeah, we anticipate that elevator project to be completed this summer.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Not see any. Personally, I'm real happy with the results. Gotta say. I have a motion. The council receives the tender results 5-year in Reno and connecting link addition report. Council award the contract of 5-year in Reno and connecting link addition to Daycon Construction Limited in the amount of $5,050,900 plus HST. And that council authorized the warden and clerk to execute the agreement between the corporation of the county of Perth, Daycon Construction. Goodbye. Councillor Gazenberg, second. Somebody had their hand up over here. Councillor Trenkowski. Those in favor? Carried. Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen, for all your assistance in getting this to this point.
And Mr. Chair, if I might say, it seems wonderfully appropriate that you're sitting in the chair when this resolution passes.
Well, we chatted about that earlier on. Myself and a couple other staff saying, we're going to deal with that today. And you were the one that was pushing for that from the get-go. And I honestly think that's the best solution we could have come up with. You know, I'm real happy about this. I'm not going to lie. And I really appreciate who forced to really bring this together. Thank you. Lori wants to say something.
Just to the warden, thank you, council. It's a game changer. Thank you, thank you, thank you on behalf of the staff and the public.
Okay, moving on. We're going to get Mr. Bill Wilson in, who's been patiently waiting for us all morning. Okay. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I believe the first report I have here is with regards to tender results for wheel loader.
Yeah.
Okay, this report, this project to replace asset B050, which is our existing John Deere 644 wheel loader. It's the larger of the two loaders that we have in our fleet. Its replacement was included in the 2023 capital program. So staff created tender specifications for the replacements. The specifications listed were set so that it is the same size and class as the one to be replaced. The bids were the bid opportunity was placed on our website. We had 11 plan takers and 3 final submissions. All bid submissions were evaluated and found to meet this unit specifications called for within the bid document. And the pricing tables were subsequently opened with the tender results tabled within the report. We had asked the vendors to supply pricing for the outright purchase as well as leasing options over a 3 as well as a 5-year term. Staff evaluated the submissions and noted that through the evaluation of the leasing options, it was demonstrated that an outright purchase would be the method to provide the best financial position for the county for this purchase. The outright purchase price provided by Wajax, which was the low bid submission, was $375,886. The unit tendered by Wajax is for a Hitachi brand loader. It's a ZW256, which is the same class as the one to be replaced. The delivery time noted by the vendor was 6 weeks from time of order till estimated time of receipt of that unit. Staff are familiar with the vendor, just in the fact that they are well established within the industry. However, we have not purchased from them, as to my knowledge anyways, through the county. But they do provide equipment for other municipalities and their market, as well as heavy equipment operator or construction companies and things like that. They do have mobile service units offering London and Cambridge. We'll be able to service our area, and the bid price also included a 5-year warranty for that. Just one other thing to note through that tender, it was created with 2 parts. Part A of that tender was specific to the county's procurement efforts. Part B was specific to Perth South's interests, as they were also looking to receive pricing for voter. So it was joint tender, Part A, specific to the county. And staff are recommending that Part A of the bid be awarded to Wajax through the outright purchase. That concludes my report.
Questions for Bill? Thanks, Paul. Motion, council receives the tender results 2023-33-03. Supply a wheel loader by lease or outright purchase report. And the council award part A of tender 2023-033-03 to Wajax Equipment through outright purchase in the amount of $375,886, excluding HST. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Smith. Those in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. And then we're going to move on to the next one. And that is the Perth Road 113.
Through you, Chair. Back in October last year, council directed staff to investigate and report back on a request to install a stop at the intersection of Perth Road 112 and line 29. As staff informed council, we would engage a traffic engineering consultant to review the intersection and also include the intersection of Perth Road 13 and line 29 immediately to the west. Line 29 is a township roadway under the jurisdiction of Perth East, east of Perth Road 112, and Perth South to the west of Perth Road 112. Perth Road 112 and Perth Road 113 are under the jurisdiction of the County of Perth and are the through roadways from the City of Stratford boundary south to Perth line 26. With the stop controls on line 29, the county is responsible for the care and control at both intersections. The topic of line 29 and its intersections at Perth Road 112 and 113 have been discussed over the past 5 or 6 years with our 2 local municipalities, OPP and Stratford Police. These discussions mainly pertain to the frequency and severity of collisions at that intersection. And as a result of these discussions, a measured approach was taken to safety enhancements at that intersection. These improvements include upgrading the stop and stop ahead signs, flashing red beacons on top of the stop signs, painted stop bars, and horizontal alignment improvements during our 2020 capital construction projects. Those improvements have helped, but collisions continue to occur at both intersections. Paradigm Transportation Solutions were retained to undertake a traffic control assessment of both intersections to determine what improvements would be warranted based on regulations, guiding documents, and related criteria. The assessment considered current road conditions, traffic patterns, collision history, turning movements, traffic volume growth, and past remedial improvements. The Paradigm report is attached for council's reference and includes an always stop warrants based on criterion guidelines provided in Book 5 regulatory signs of the Ontario Traffic Manual. The always stop warrant considers criteria for both traffic volumes and collision history, and the Paradigm report concludes that both intersections do not meet the always stop warrant with regard to traffic volumes. However, both intersections do meet the collision warrant, which is an average of 3 accidents per year over a 3-year period. Paradigm recommends installation of always stops at both intersections based on the data. The staff would also note that the Paradigm report suggests that the level of service of Perth Road 112 and 113 would not be lowered and continue to operate at a level of service A. Currently, line 29 operates at a service B, and now through an always stop installation would operate at level of service A. The county currently has 2 always stop locations within its road network, one at Perth line 26 and Perth Road 113, and one in the village of Amalree. Both operate effectively and have reduced the frequency of collisions at both locations. The difference, however, is that these are intersections of 2 county roadways. Given the proximity of line 29 to the city of Stratford, current traffic patterns, the measured approach to previous intersection and safety improvements, and the collision history, staff are recommending that council designate the intersections of Perth Road 112 and line 29 and Perth Road 113 and line 29 as always stops. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for John? Bill, he's also a co-author here on this. Select Warner.
More of a comment. I know there's going to be people that love this, and I know there's going to be people that hate this. Are we, like, I haven't seen this come to our local council. I'm wondering if there is input allowed, or does that decision already get made here because it is the county road? And B, are we not concerned about people now avoiding the road because of the stops, and it'll be heavier traffic than on line 26 or other places?
Through the chair, certainly through this whole process and certainly going back 5 or 6 years, the public works departments of both Perth South and Perth East have been included in all discussions. And typically always those discussions include the OPP and then as things transpired, the Stratford Police who look after Perth South and the city of Stratford. So there's always been input and consideration from the local municipalities in this, but from a public works perspective. But yes, the county controls the intersection. The jurisdiction lies within the county. And it's the county's decision to make as far as the controls of the intersection. I would note that as with any intersection within the county road network, we always try and be consistent in our application, consider good engineering, traffic engineering principles, and guiding documents and regulations and things like the Ontario Traffic Manual. So things of this nature are data driven, very, very much so in the case of the collision history. And we were very prudent and went back with the consultant just to ensure, because I think there's one thing with the collision history that was not said in my presentation, and that average of 3 accidents per year over a 3-year span, that's only considers accidents that could be sort of eliminated, if you will, or possibly prevented through an always stop control. So there's certain accidents that someone running off the road or sliding off into the ditch or hitting a deer, things like that. Those are reportable collisions, but none that would factor into decisions of this nature. So we'd only be considering accidents like a right angle type or T-bone type of collision in this regard. So the collision history is here. You can't ignore it. Would it, our preference is not to put in an always stop at a township to county roadway. However, just given its proximity, the traffic patterns, it is appropriate in this case and recommended by staff. I would note that I think there will be some impacts to traffic patterns by implementing these always stops, and it's something we're going to have to be mindful of and look for. As I said before, we do have 2 always stops that operate effectively within the county. Again, the same sort of process has always been put through for any kind of intersection safety, and we've always tried to take a measured approach to this. So we're confident in that sense that implementing always stops at these locations is appropriate. I would also note, I think traffic patterns, notice the timing of all this too is the MTO installed roundabouts on Highway 7 at Perth Line 26 and Perth Line 20. And I strongly think that's impacted traffic patterns in that area. And as a result, there's likely more traffic on line 29. There's also no doubt that there's more traffic on line 29 from people coming from the east, say the KW area, and looking to go in the summertime to the Grand Bend area, Lake Huron, that kind of thing. That certainly is impactful in the amount of traffic that is on a township roadway and not really intended to carry that volume of traffic. So that answers your.
Thank you.
There is a lot more traffic on line 29 in the summer. Because when they had to avoid the roundabout at DNS for 26, they started coming that way and they went, wow, we can avoid going through Tavistock, all kinds of things here. And they got a 4-way stop to 113 anyway. So they'll come zipping up through there now. We see that through the chair. We've also seen the roundabout at Perth Line 20 and Line 20 there at the Clumps corner. We've seen a lot more traffic using Line 20, that the township roadway, turning left off of Perth Road 113 as you're heading north, and avoiding a lot of that Stratford area and things like that, where get around. See more now because you had all the trucks that's going into everywhere. They now come up line 6 Oxford into 113, and they do come up line 20. I've never seen as many big trucks up through there in my life as I have this last year or so. We're talking big E-trains and all kinds of stuff. Okay, got a motion. Council receives the Perth Road 112, 113 and line 29 traffic control assessment report, and council receives the traffic control assessment report dated April 13, 2023 by Paradigm Transportation Solutions Limited. The council designate the intersections of Perth Road 112 and line 29 as an all-way stop by amending Schedule A of bylaw 2956, designating through highways. And the council designate the intersection of Road 113 and line 29 as an all-way stop by amending Schedule A of bylaw 2956, designating through highways. We were in a seconder. Councillor McDermott, Councillor, you were getting your hand up there, Walter, or is that you just, okay, wasn't sure. Any more discussion? All in favor? Carried, thank you. You may see one further up 29 at 122 coming up too. Okay, moving on. Another tender results, and this is Bill. You going to do this one?
Yes, through your chair. Thank you. This report summarizes the results of the tender process for and recommends award of the bid opportunity for the capital project for the structural repairs to the Fish Creek Bridge, our asset inventory number 139011. The existing structure there is a pre-stressed eye girder concrete bridge. It's located on Perth Road 139. and spans over the Fish Creek watercourse, which is within the Upper Thames watershed. It's just a little northeast of Prospect Hill. Tender documents were prepared in consultation with the project's engineering consultant, and they were issued through the county's online bidding system. There were 17 plan takers with 4 tender submissions. The results are tabled within the report. The submission received from Van Driel Excavating represents the low bid submission and includes all supplementary required documents of the tender. The submissions were reviewed by staff as well as the consulting engineer who had noted that the vendor is experienced in similarly scoped projects and that they are not aware of any reason that the contract should not be awarded to Van Driel based on their submission. Staff are familiar with the work of Van Driel. The contractor is local to the area and has completed numerous similarly scoped civil projects for municipal and private clients throughout Perth and Huron counties. Most recently contracted to the county in 2018 when they were awarded a capital project for the replacement of a structure on 113, I think. Yes. The budget established for this project is $810,000. The low bid received from Van Driel is within the project budget with the tendered amount at $621,141.49. That excludes HST and provisional items. If we were to include the provisional items, which are for things such as guardrail and environmental site controls and project contingencies, the total bid received there would be $791,379.41, which is also within the approved budget for the project. We haven't established a definitive construction start date for this project, but it's likely that it will be later in the year, probably towards the beginning of September. There is a stipulated completion date for the project in the documents of November 3rd. And staff are recommending that the tender be awarded to Van Driel Excavating. If there's any questions? Questions?
Anything else? You have the blessing from Upper Thames to work on this?
Yes, we do.
The motion council receives the tender results 2023-031-03. Fish Creek Bridge Repair Structure 139011 report. And that council award tender 2023-031-03 to Van Driel Excavating Inc. Moved by Councilor McDermott, seconded by Councilor Orr. Those in favor, that's carried. And we're going to move on. We have some bylaws. First one is bylaw 3928-2023, signing of authorization tender 2023-031-03 Van Driel. And that is that bylaw 3928-023 be read a first, second, third time and finally pass this 18th day of May 2023. Moved by Councillor Duncan, second by Councillor Trentkesk. Those in favor, it's carried. And we have another bylaw here. And that is bylaw 3929-023 regarding OPA number 199. Just back for your reference, that's the Bell Sands gravel pit. And the bylaw 3929-2023 be read a first, second, and third time. And finally pass the 18th day of May 2023. Moved by Councillor Smith, second by Councillor Orr. Those in favor, carried. Moving on, notice of motions. Other business. Announcements. Closed session, we don't have. Confirmatory bylaw, bylaw number 3930-2023 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council of the corporation of the county of Perth Its regular meeting held May the 18th, 2023. Was read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed May 18th, 2023. Moved by Councillor Kassenberg, seconded by Councillor McDermott. Those in favor? Carried. You guys have your hands up quicker. And final motion of the day. Council meeting adjourned at 1:42. Councillor Orr, Councillor Smith, those in favor? It's carried. Thank you very much. Long meeting.